Chapter 2199. She felt like she was dreaming. Zero retracted his outstretched arms and bowed elegantly to Wei Bai. "Miss, are you satisfied with what you saw?" Wei Bai saw those dead enemies and a lot of kneeling and begging for mercy. If she said she was not satisfied, she felt like she would be thrown into the burning flames in the next moment. The power of the target of this plane. It was beyond the plane. He should be in the cultivation plane, not abusing ordinary humans in this plane. Wei Bai coughed lightly. "I'm enough. I don't need you anymore." If he continued to do this, the second apocalypse was coming. Zero got a superficial answer, but he was not angry. Instead he smiled and leaned over. "Is there a reward?" Wei Bai stretched out her finger and flicked his forehead unhurriedly. "You're already so old. Why are you asking for a reward like a child? Go back." This sudden flick definitely wouldn't leave any mark on his forehead. But Zero was stunned for a moment, as if he did not expect her to do this. It was a simple yet extremely relaxing action. It made his heart itch. Zero pursed his lips, and the greed in his eyes could hardly be hidden. He suddenly rushed over, grabbed her waist and pulled her into his arms. The two of them disappeared on the spot. Before Wei Bai could react, they ran to the Tree of Life. The huge Tree of Life had branches as wide as a bed. She lay on the branch. Zero couldn't wait to say, "This tree is very good. The nourishment of life is very good for your body, so..." Dewa also said this. Did Erwa remember to bring her here to relax and pick the fruit of life for her to make juice? In the end, in a trance, she saw Erwa taking off his clothes crazily. Wei Bai, Zero was like a fallen Satan. He sat there, his seductive and blurred eyes burning as if he wanted to eat someone. His beautiful gray-blue hair scattered on his fair skin. It was simply terrible. Even a demon was not as seductive as him. Wei Bai, if she didn't pounce on him and violate her character setting, how could she tolerate this little demon's lawlessness? Zero looked at Wei Bai's pale face and said with a smile, "Here your body will be much better. I will be very careful. You will be fine." Wei Bai frowned. "Is this all you have in your mind?" Zero looked confused and innocent. "Isn't this the most beautiful thing in the world?" Wei Bai, "Fuck, is this Erwa's head? He probably has excavators, oil tankers and high-speed rail. All kinds of extreme racing cars without a guilty conscience." Zero's tone softened and became more charming. "Just once. I'm so handsome, shouldn't you be flustered by me?" Wei shook her head. Zero's eyes suddenly turned dangerous. "Then who do you feel that way towards? The main personality? Her child, her children?" Wei Bai shook her head without hesitation. But Zero's eyes were still vicious. "Alright. That damn little retard." Wei Bai raised her eyes and said coldly, "Don't scold him. He's still a child." Zero dragged his voice. "Child," his words were strange and evil. Wei Bai wanted to get up, but Zero held her shoulders. His voice was like a low moan in the dark night. "Wei, I only have feelings for you now. I only want to seduce you and see you lose control for me." Chapter 2200. Wei Bai's pink face was blank for a moment. Then, a trace of confusion and hesitation appeared in her clear eyes. Zero's fingers gently touched her face. It was as soft as coaxing a child. "When I see you, I want you. Do you have such feelings for me?" Wei Bai seemed to want to shake her head, but for some reason, it was as if she was being controlled. She actually nodded. There was a trace of joy in Zero's eyes. But behind this joy, there was a condescending and proud look. It was true that he could control people's hearts. Wei Bai was almost in a daze as he led her away. He asked her to love him and she even said yes. When the system saw that Wei Bai was about to be controlled, it immediately took out the hammer that was nailed to the small stool and gently knocked on Wei Bai's head. Wei Bai immediately woke up. Fortunately, the system was not blocked. Otherwise she would be controlled by Zero. Was there really no problem with this kind of ability to conquer the target of this plane? He was insane. It was the standard of a demon of the apocalypse. Zero thought that she was being controlled. He leaned lazily against the tree trunk. His clothes were open and scattered. His white chest, beautiful collarbones, and strong and thin waist were exposed. He seemed to be born to seduce. "Come here, Wei Bai." Wei Bai looked at him calmly. She couldn't be any calmer. Zero, that enchanting little vixen, had prepared everything. He was just waiting for Wei Bai to pounce on him. In the end, Wei looked at him with an indifferent expression. Zero showed a rare trace of confusion. His fingertips moved. That familiar feeling of controlling people's hearts came again. The system took out the small hammer and continued to hit the host's head. It was afraid that the host would become stupid. So it was gentle and didn't dare to use force. Wei Bai suddenly felt awake again. She looked at Zero expressionlessly. It was as if she was looking at a piece of dead pork. She said calmly, "It's cold, don't catch a cold." Zero struggled with all his might. Wei, come here and throw yourself at me." Wei Bai reached out and picked a wild fruit from the side. She looked at him as if she was watching a show. Then he indifferently nibbled on the fruit. It was sweet, sour, and delicious. She was very cold, calm, and unmoved as she looked at the sky. "It's almost evening. It's time to go back for dinner." Ling twisted his body so much that he looked like a fried dough twist. Unfortunately, the person in front of him was blind. And it was a piece of wood that he couldn't control. Zero did not suspect why his ability was ineffective against Wei Bai. After all, she was his creator, and his abilities were ineffective against her. It was quite normal. But even if it was ineffective, he was still like this. She actually treated wild fruit better than him. Zero's glass heart had been shattered a second time. This time it could not be mended. They were all crushed into powder. It was all gone after being blown by Wei Bai's unromantic cold wind. He struggled with his eyes wide open. "Don't you have any feelings for me?" Wei Bai was silent for a while. Then she reluctantly said, "Oh, you're not bad." These words were full of politeness and he couldn't be more disgusted. Zero ran his fingers through his hair. His posture was stiff. Meat sent from 1,000 miles away. Why didn't she take a few bites? Besides, he was the best delicacy. Wei Bai reached out and picked a few more fruits. She was used to eating these fruits. They tasted too good. She did not know when the next time would come. Wei Bai decided to get more. She saw Zero's jacket and casually threw it aside. However, after Wei Bai got the jacket, she said indifferently, "Lend me your fruits." After that, she began to pick the fruits. Finally, she hugged the jacket, and the wild fruits inside. Zero? He decided that he should take the initiative. So, just as he pounced over with a ferocious expression, Wei Bai suddenly stuffed the jacket into his arms. She pointed at the red fruit under the tree and said, "That's delicious." The tree was so tall. She was about to jump down. Ling's expression changed. He pulled her back and scolded, "What are you doing? Don't jump." Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and smiled. "I'm not that weak." Zero said coldly, "It's just a few fruits. Is it worth it for you to make a move?" After he finished speaking, he appeared under the tree and squatted down like an old farmer, quickly picking the fruits. He plucked and plucked. Zero suddenly realized what he was doing. He was here to lure people. He was not here to be a coolie. But when he looked up, he saw Wei Bai sitting on a tree branch, looking at him with sparkling eyes. There was a slight smile at the corner of his mouth. For a moment he was silent. Then he lowered his head and continued to pick the fruit. Since he liked these wild fruits so much, he picked them and cut them up before putting them on himself. He wanted to see if she was tempted. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://www.sashu.com//crossover system. Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://m.sashu.com//crossover system. Adonis, come here. Comma. Chapter 2201. Wei Bai ate a stomach full of fruits and felt that life was coming back to life. Erwa was thinking that if she did not pounce on him, he could pounce on her back. But when he saw her happily squinting her eyes, holding a fruit, her feet hanging between the branches, slowly nibbling on the fruit, Zero was instantly struck by her cuteness. Her eyes were clear and without calculation. Her usually serious face also became soft and tender. Between the lush green leaves, the sunlight fell on her hair, as if all the light in the world was on her. Zero was very difficult to seduce. His body was the seduction itself, so he was immune to it. But when he leaned on the tree and looked at her, eating the food he picked without asking for anything, at this moment he felt warmth. It was far from the satisfaction that desire alone could bring. So was this the warmth brought by the memories that the little idiot had experienced? Zero lowered his eyes and stared at her intently. Suddenly he noticed something, frowned, and looked at the leaves of the tree of life. Petrified? Zero felt something, and his body hungrily absorbed the life force of the tree of life. This was the automatic replenishment of his body after he used his ability. He desperately absorbed from everything that had life force. Half of a tree had been petrified from the inside. It was not obvious from the outside. Wei Wei Bai's expression did not change as she ate, but her eyes flashed with a hint of doubt. Tongzi? Is there something wrong with this tree? The energy was different, so she felt different, although the ability was temporarily gone. But it did not mean that her feelings would disappear. The system looked into the tree and said, more than half of its life force has been absorbed, it's almost dead. Wei Wei Bai asked, Zero absorbed? The system said, yes, he has a devouring instinct. If he uses his ability, he will absorb everything with life force. There are not many things with life force in the apocalypse. If he destroys wantonly, he will devour other things to maintain his body. Devouring life force was a very scary instinct, especially in a place like the apocalypse. If Zero did not suppress himself, this plane would probably be over. Wei Wei Bai thought of this too, but before this plane was over, she would probably leave. Therefore he didn't feel anything. Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked, will he devour human life force? The system replied, yes, but humans are not his first choice because their vitality is too weak. Therefore humans would be the last choice. Wei Wei Bai, damn, I really created a monster. Zero suppressed her instinct to absorb the tree of life. After all, this tree was still useful. It could nourish Wei Wei Bai's body. But in his body, the hungry personality was clamoring with all its might. Not enough, not enough. Zero smiled coldly and waited until Wei Wei was sent back. He then looked for things with life force to absorb. After all, his hungry personality had started to develop a terrifying possessiveness towards Wei Wei Bai. Even the primary personality reminded him not to let him out. Therefore, he could only satisfy his hunger and suppress that personality to continue sleeping. Seeing that it was about time, Zero tore open the space and stretched out his hand in a flirtatious yet beautiful manner. Good girl, we should go home. Wei Wei Bai raised her head to look at him. She didn't have time to hide the gentleness in her eyes, so she simply gave him a look. It seemed to be flirting with him. But this flirtatious look disappeared in an instant. Crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 2202. She got up calmly and walked to his side with steady steps. Then, she put her finger in his palm in a reserved and casual manner. It was soft and warm to the touch. It was like the feeling of trust. It was a very strange feeling. Zero narrowed his eyes and smiled. Suddenly, he lifted her up in his arms. Without hesitation, he walked into the violent space. After she returned, Zero did not try to seduce her. Instead, he saw that she was tired. He just held her fingers and kissed them. Then he watched her eat and rest. When it was time to sleep at night, Ling even put away his flirtatious appearance and read fairy tales to the air ball in her stomach. It was said that this was prenatal education. Ling was disdainful and cold, but he still read it. Wei Wei Bai's eyes softened from indifference. In the end, she even looked at him with a trace of gentleness. Then she slowly closed her eyes. Just when Ling thought that she was asleep, he got up and was about to look for food. A hand suddenly reached out from the quilt and gently grabbed the corner of his clothes. Zero paused. A trace of doubt flashed through her beautiful eyes, sparkling like water. Suddenly, a calm but gentle voice came from behind him. I have never regretted creating you. This sentence was light and soft. Like a feather, it fell on the tip of Ling's heart. Ling paused for a long time. After all, the personality that she had always disliked was suddenly treated gently at this moment. To let this personality that was only good at guiding humans to have dark and evil thoughts. He actually felt a sense of unfamiliarity and bewilderment. Ling calmed down the strange emotions in his heart and gently turned back. But he saw that she was already leaning against the pillow. Her thick eyelashes covered her clear eyes and she fell asleep. Ling's mouth twitched. She seduced him. He felt like he was kicked away again. This was even worse than him. He stared at her in silence for a long time. Her face, which was originally beautiful to the point of ominous, unexpectedly became pure white and gentle. I really want to do whatever he wanted to her. But he didn't do anything. Instead, he slowly held her fingers and put them back into the quilt. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her gently on the lips with his flirtatious thin lips. Good night, my princess. Ding air was favorability is at 65. Then Zero tidied up her clothes, turned around, and disappeared to find a place to absorb life force. Not long after he left, Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes. She was awake and cold. The system said, the place he went to should be the monster's lair. There are still a few big monsters there, but most importantly, it's a forest and grassland. This was the best place for the apocalypse. It was also the place where life force was the most abundant. And as long as Zero went there, All life would be sucked out of that forest and grassland, turning it into a desert. Wei Wei Bai adjusted her sleeping position. So be it, the apocalypse can't get any worse anyways. Just don't try to take advantage of the humans. Towards Erwa, she treated him coldly and disdainfully. Then she would occasionally give him some warmth. Just like that, her favorability towards him increased. Wei Wei Bai had just closed her eyes when she suddenly heard a dangerous ding. Sure enough, the side quest came. Ding, please save the world. This mission completely shocked Wei Wei Bai. It was truly shocking. What kind of mission was saving the world? It was fine if the mission didn't come, but if it did, it would force her to commit suicide. Save the world. Detected that the host's level is too low. Mission error, the main system has assigned a new mission. Download the at https://m. Sashu.com. Chapter 2203. Wei Wei Bai finally let out a sigh of relief. There were benefits to being too low in level. For example, she did not have to do such a terrible mission like saving the world. Please destroy all abilities of the dangerous person who is destroying the world. Mission progress 1/4. All abilities of the fourth personality are destroyed. Wei Wei Bai, she needed a cigarette to calm down, she was going crazy. While she was conquering the enemy, she had to destroy the enemy's godlike abilities. The difficulty of such a mission was no different from saving the world. They were all so difficult that it was almost insane. Directly lighting up a skyscraper monkey and flying in a spiral in the sky was easier than her mission. The side missions continued to be released. This mission is classified as a special difficult mission. Personalities with a favorability of 70 and above will be considered to have completed the mission. You can enter the destruction side mission. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. The first time a main mission appeared, it would be considered to have been completed as long as the favorability of 70. It was obvious that this side mission was really difficult. The side mission was cold and did not have any intention of acting cute. It was as if this mission was a temporary emergency, so it needed to be done quickly. Side mission failed. The host and the system's soul will be destroyed at the same time. Wei Wei Bai and the system. This was much better than being naked and twisting one's butt or twisting one's neck while dancing. The main system was very clear. If it did not kill Zero, she would die together with the system. After the side mission was released, they did not need to sleep anymore. Wei Wei Bai and the system were silent for a long time. Finally, Wei Wei Bai said, "This mission, is the main system finally unable to bear with me cursing it in my heart every day, so it decided to set a trap to kill me?" The system sighed, "I also bought a few cursed scarecrows, wrote its name, and hammered its little hooks every day, cursing it to be a sissy." The two systems with dark hearts were silent for a long time. So this was the main system's revenge mission? What a petty and vicious little bitch. Of course he couldn't say that. Who knew where the main system was spying on them? Therefore Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "The main system must be handsome, noble, and pure. Everyone will love it and ghosts will worship it. I wish it was my real father." The system immediately nodded. Speaking of the main system, it's the most awesome existence in the system world. It's my god, my everything. If I could be its little honey, I would faint from excitement. Then Wei Wei Bai and 004 fell silent at the same time. He didn't expect his host, system, to be so thick-skinned. She actually dared to say that she wanted to be his father, sell her body? He really admitted defeat. In the end, Wei Wei Bai silently pulled the blanket over herself. "Forget it. We'll think of a plan tomorrow. Let me sleep first today." After saying that, she was very calm and quickly fell asleep. His mental fortitude was too strong. How could he sleep like this? After sighing, the system took out the Teru Teru Bozu again and hastened its pace to embroider the eyes. If his soul was destroyed and he didn't have time to return the handmade doll, he would be fined. Zero looked at everything in front of him coldly. The green life force was all absorbed by him. The large forest, grass and flowers. They were all petrified and turned into sand. He reached out and licked his finger unhurriedly. His thin lips curled up beautifully as he revealed a satisfied smile. How delicious. Even if he wasn't a hungry personality, this kind of life force replenishment was very comfortable for him. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. / Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Download the at https://m. Sashu.com/ button at the bottom to record this chapter. You'll be able to see it the next time you open your bookshelf. If you like, Transmigration system. Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 2204. Zero bent down and picked up a large bag of fruits beside him. There were only a few fruits left in this place, so he would take them back for Weiwei Bai to eat. Then he turned around, stepped into the crack in space and disappeared in a flash. Everything behind him was a desert. Weiwei Bai woke up and thought of a plan. A weapon that can nullify zero abilities if the HP is less than 1000. If the favorability was 70, then it would pass. Then Dehua and Sanhua would both pass. Only Erhua was left. With 65 favorability it would be easy to get. The salted fish state was completely driven out by the soul destruction. Her and the system's 2 lives depended on her now. 1000 HP was the price she had to pay. If it wasn't enough, then she could only bear the pain and continue to bid. The system flipped through the supermarket. There's a broken divine artifact, it might be on sale but you'll need to wait. Weiwei Bai supported her chin with her hand, her eyes rational and calm. We can't resist the main system's punishment. The feeling of her life being in someone else's hands was really uncomfortable. The system was silent for a while, then said, Weiwei, I'm sorry, I don't have that ability. Weiwei Bai shook her head, her eyes firm. It's fine after so many difficulties, this time isn't that difficult. When Erhua's favorability reached 70. She stabbed him with the divine artifact, his ability was destroyed. She went straight home, the main quest and side quest were both completed. The main system still had a conscience, this was the first time it gave in on the main quest. Maybe the main system also knew that attacking 4 personalities at once was really dangerous. Weiwei Bai understood the plan and immediately got up in high spirits. She didn't know where Erhua went, but she saw a large pot of beautiful fruits on the table. There was a cup of milk with fruit juice and a breakfast. The system said, the male lead went to find a place with vitality early on. This was a way to appease the hungry personality. If he found it in advance he could just go and absorb it if he needed it. Weiwei Bai nodded and continued to lay out the plan in her mind. After breakfast, she had just wiped her mouth when a pair of hands lazily appeared behind her and hugged her. Erhua was like a beautiful snake, gently rubbing against her, and said in a sexy and low voice, Did you miss me? Weiwei Bai said calmly, Thank you. Zero blinked and smiled lazily. What's wrong? Do you suddenly see how good I am? Weiwei Bai, yes, although the breakfast is not very good, it's still a sign of your good intentions. Erhua immediately puffed up his cheeks. Only your little retard can make delicious food. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere suddenly turned gloomy. Weiwei Bai lowered her eyes, a trace of sorrow hidden in her eyes. She suddenly asked softly, Can't he come out? Zero curled his lips, jealousy making his eyes turn red. He wanted to tell her that the little retard was dead. But when he saw the suppressed sadness in her eyes under her eyelashes, he suddenly felt bored and silently pursed his lips. Zero let go of her and straightened his body, saying coldly, Who knows? Who knows if he will sleep until he dies? As soon as he said that, the girl's straight back suddenly relaxed. She muttered to herself, her voice choking, As long as he's fine I can wait. Zero's fingers twitched. This was really making him feel frustrated and embarrassed. In the end he suppressed the urge to make a move on her. Her body was visibly weak and he couldn't be too impulsive. Chapter 2205. After all, he wasn't a hungry personality. Zero still had the strength to suppress his dark jealousy and cold possessiveness. This was also the reason why the main personality was relieved to let him out. It was just that it was so difficult to endure. He looked at Weiwei Bai with dark eyes and couldn't help but stick out the tip of his tongue and lick his lips. He couldn't destroy it. Otherwise the main personality would suppress him. He had to slowly seduce her, let her sink, let her take the initiative. Let her love him. This way, the main personality that was suppressing and losing control would not be awakened. As a temptation, as long as he slowly invaded her life, sooner or later, she would be hypnotized and seduced by him. Weiwei Bai regained her calmness, as if she didn't know that the jealous Erhua behind her was looking at her with dark and greedy eyes. She went to see the experimental subjects as usual. The experimental subjects were as usual. If everything went well, more than 3 psychics could be produced at once. The strength of the base would increase explosively. Then she went to see the situation of the captives in the base. Zero followed her lazily. When the captives saw Zero, they all started crying. Some of them were filled with fanaticism, while others were filled with hatred. But without exception, when he walked over, everyone retreated to the side. The vast and mighty crowd opened up a path that seemed to be for the king to walk on. Weiwei Bai held a folder in her hand and casually recorded the number of people. Seeing this scene, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Zero turned his head and saw her smiling eyes. Under the sun, her smile was dazzling and charming. He almost couldn't help but bend down and gently touch the smile on her lips. "Why are you so happy?" His voice was hoarse, and there was a moment of amazement in his eyes. "Weiwei Bai, nothing, I just feel that they treat you like a god. Fear and fanaticism, worship and madness. In the apocalypse, power was the existence that controlled everything." Zero's eyelashes trembled like gorgeous butterfly wings. Red light flowed in his beautiful eyes. He lazily glanced at the group of weak and ignorant people. His thin lips curled up in a cold sneer. "Then, do you also think that you have created a god?" Weiwei Bai's eyes flashed with confusion. She looked at him and her gaze was distant. He seemed to be reminiscing about something. Zero didn't like her expression. It was as if she was going to disappear at any moment. What a disgusting illusion. The confusion in Weiwei Bai's eyes disappeared little by little, and light appeared little by little. Like the morning sun, a smile appeared in her eyes. "No, when I created you, I was very happy." Zero didn't expect this answer. It was simply too impossible. Wasn't she guarded against them coldly? Bai Weiwei's voice was low, and it even sounded a bit fragile. "This apocalypse is too lonely. I want to create someone who loves me and stays with me for the rest of my life." What precious words. It was like a glimmer in the dark. Weiwei Bai smiled helplessly. "I was the one who made you have a fledgling complex. I want you to love me." Zero could almost see through the lonely soul in her eyes at a glance. Her body was even trembling slightly. All of Zero's seduction were no longer effective. There was even a hint of confusion in his tone. "But you," she didn't seem happy about their appearance. Weiwei Bai calmly interrupted him. "You're free and you don't seem to love me very much. I feel that my selfish thoughts are very childish, so I hope that you can control your own life and not be controlled by me." Chapter 2206. After saying that, she stepped back and looked at him deeply. Then she turned around and walked away without hesitation. The system praised, "Your ability to talk nonsense has not deteriorated at all." Weiwei Bai said modestly, "I don't dare to forget when it comes to eating." Ling stood in place with a confused expression, but a strange joy surged in his heart. He repeated softly, "Love?" She actually loved him. No, it was their love. This thought came abruptly, but it was enough to make him happy. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, and there was a deep smile in his eyes. So cute. The more he looked at her, the cuter she was. Especially when she told him about the loneliness in her soul with a fragile face. He actually felt excited. It wasn't pity, but the excitement of controlling her weakness. But he knew that she might be joking. After all, she really didn't have any good feelings for him. But even if it was fake, when he heard this, he was still very happy. Ling felt that he might not be able to hold it in for long before his sick possessiveness took hold of her. Ding, Erwa's favorability is at 70. Congratulations, host, the main mission has been locked. Please complete the side mission before the attack time is up. This time the mission had been notified in advance that the favorability was complete, and the side mission could be postponed. That was why Weiwei Bai dared to increase Erwa's favorability. If it was like before, the side mission and the main mission had to be synchronized. Once the main mission was completed, the side mission also had to be completed. Then in this plane, she and the system could only kill themselves. She sighed, acting pitiful, and Erwa's favorability increased. It seems that Erwa is still very sympathetic. She thought that among the 4 personalities, only Erwa was kind and sweet. Perhaps he had been infected by her little cookies and candy cubes. That restless Erwa who looked like a flirtatious bitch. He actually had some sympathy. She showed a bit of vulnerability to him and his favorability increased. It was really unexpected. System, sympathy? He silently turned back and looked at Erwa's twisted and dark eyes. Where was the sympathy? He didn't see it. Erwa's eyes were more like eating people. Suddenly, a beeping sound came from the supermarket. It was the sound of the discount notification that he had activated. The system immediately opened it to take a look. The incomplete divine artifact had been discounted. The divine artifact was an ancient heaven-punishing dagger. Small and easy to hide, it was very handy. When the main system tried to retrieve it, it took a lot of effort. It was actually incomplete, with only 1 attack left. Furthermore, the remaining attack wasn't that powerful either. When the main system saw this, it threw the dagger to the system as a reward. In the end, whoever obtained the dagger was unlucky. As long as the system and the host had anything to do with the dagger, they would either fail the mission or die for no apparent reason. In the end, no one dared to take it and it was thrown into the supermarket for recycling. Wasn't the system poor? There was nothing he could do about it. If he was unlucky, so be it. They were all about to die, so what could be worse than having their souls destroyed? Therefore, the system immediately said to the host, "That damaged artifact has been discounted. It has 580 HP, and its ability is so awesome that it can definitely destroy the male lead's ability. However, because of the damaged part, it can only be used once." Wei Wei Bai stopped in her tracks and was silent for a long time. Only then did she hold her little heart and let out a painful sound. Buy it. Her HP. Go to hell, main system, beep 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 beep. Chapter 2207. The divine artifact was very ordinary. It was just a small dagger without any special features. It was bald and had no pattern, but she had bought it for 580 yuan. Wei Wei Bai thought that it was actually quite pretty. If even she thought that it was not pretty, it would be a waste of her life points. She weighed the light dagger and thought hard about how she should stab him. After all, she only had one chance. Should she pretend to hug him and stab him in the kidney? Wei Wei Bai, who was still thinking, suddenly heard the system notification and immediately hid the dagger in her pocket. The space distorted and Zero appeared. He was wearing a light green shirt and black leggings. This outfit was an eyesore. Fortunately, he still had a handsome face to save him. Zero held a pile of folders in his hands and placed them in front of Wei Wei Bai. All the energy resources of more than 10 bases are here. Because in the apocalypse, all the bases were competing in network technology. They were worried that someone would hack into the network and leak important information. Therefore, very important information had to be recorded and kept by hand. After he put down the folders, he sat beside Baiwan lazily and leaned on her. His soft black hair fell on his fair forehead. His beautiful red eyes were still bright and beautiful. They were like the most beautiful rubies, making people want to sink into them. Zero's voice was hoarse and sexy. "Recently, my waist and back have been aching. It's been really tiring to run around for the past few days." Wei Wei Bai, should she stab him in the kidney? This position seemed to be just right. Zero thought that she did not understand what he meant. He twisted his waist and frowned slightly. "Your skin has become rougher." Wei Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe and could not help but look at his back. Her hands were itching. She was just one step away from completing the mission. Where should she stab him? Zero suddenly looked up lazily. He felt that Wei Wei Bai was looking at him with a little enthusiasm. Was she starting to feel sorry for him? Wei Wei Bai felt that it was not safe to stab him now. After all, Zero was too fast. If only her superpower had recovered. But now he was holding an empty balloon in his stomach. Her favorability rating seemed to have been completed. This air ball was useless. Wei Wei Bai regained her senses. Why hadn't she thought of this? Now that the air ball was gone, her superpower had recovered. Needless to say, she would have no problem stabbing Zero once. Wei Wei Bai immediately contacted the system. "Is there any product that can solve the problem of air balls quickly?" The system replied, "Yes, yes, yes. This is a hot seller in the supermarket. Because it's not that expensive, it's a hot seller. They're even selling it at a 20% discount. It's not expensive at all." Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. Her eyes lit up when she heard the discount. Her poor mentality immediately flared up. "Buy it quickly. Save as much as you can." The system immediately pressed the purchase button. "This thing is a little bad. It has a short shelf life. Use it immediately after you buy it. Don't worry, there are no side effects." Wei Wei Bai also didn't want to waste her HP. That 580 HP made her even more stingy. She replied, "Yes, yes, yes." The system bought it and gave it to her directly. Wei Wei Bai felt a chill in her body, and her stomach started to hurt. Didn't she say there were no side effects? This pain was too real. Zero looked at Bai Weiwei, watching her in a daze. He pursed his lips unhappily. He didn't care about him at all. Didn't she say, a lonely soul yearning to be loved? It seemed like his soul had been seduced away by some foxy woman, leaving him with an empty shell. Download the at https://m. Sashu. Com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2208. Ling stretched out his finger and was about to turn her face to look at him. He didn't like it when she ignored him. Just as his finger touched her face, he realized that her skin was very cold. Furthermore, there was cold sweat. Ling's finger trembled. His dark and selfish heart actually flashed with an uncontrollable panic. Wei Wei Bai frowned and pushed his finger away. She reached out to cover her stomach and said weakly, "I'm fine." Her expression had changed. How could she be fine? After a while he realized something and his eyes fell on her stomach. Her finger was on it. The back of her hand was trembling so badly that the veins were protruding. It was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. The darkness in Ling's eyes was dispelled by her pain. He didn't even know when he would be captured by the fear of cowardice. Without thinking much, he carried her and disappeared. They came to the medical room. All kinds of equipment were turned on. The memories of the weakest personality surged up. He saw those memories appear bit by bit. He knew how to check and what medicine to use to relieve her pain. He even held her fingers tightly with one hand. It seemed to be a form of comfort. This wasn't something he would do. Ling thought so. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai curled up into a ball. Blood flowed out from her lower body and dripped to the ground from the operating table. The faint sound of blood flowing. It was a shocking sight. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. She looked up with sweaty eyes. There's pregnancy medicine. Ling's face darkened. However, he suppressed his voice and tried to be as gentle as possible. In the gentleness, he spoke in his usual lazy tone. "You won't die. I'm here." These words were not sweet nothings. It was even rough. However, at this moment, Ling's heart surged with real feelings. With him around, she couldn't die. Wei Wei Bai's fingers held on to him. Her sweaty fingers stuck to his fingers. She smiled weakly. "I think the child is gone." The effects of the supermarket's products were too fast. After saying that, her vision turned black and she fainted. Zero was already holding a syringe and injecting the medicine into her blood vessels. However, no matter how fast he was powerless to reverse the situation. The child was gone. Zero blinked blankly. It was rare for his fox-like shrewd eyes to be so stupid and sluggish. He looked at her lying on the operating table full of blood. His heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was going to explode. Their interlocked fingers were stained with blood. It was their child's blood. A sharp pain suddenly came. The instinctive reactions of his several personalities were thrown into chaos at the same time, and they went berserk in his body. Zero's eyes suddenly changed colors several times before finally settling on red. Zero stretched out his hand and gently nourished her body with his own power, keeping her alive. Then he quickly gave her a blood transfusion. Everything happened very quickly, very familiarly, and very gently. Actually, when the primary personality was fighting for control of the body, he should have woken him up and let the primary personality deal with it. But for some reason, Zero refused to let go of her hand. This feeling was strange and crazy. It was different from the dark greed he had for her earlier. Instead, he felt heartache for her. Ding Erwa's favorability is at 75. Just as the blood transfusion was done, Zero was about to deal with the operating table. His expression suddenly changed. It was cold, arrogant, and murderous. What's going on? The primary personality woke up. Chapter 2209. Zero forced a smile. His deep and hoarse voice had a sense of heaviness to it. The child is gone. He closed his eyes and opened them again. It was a beautiful golden color. The flowing golden color was the familiar and aloof coldness. But when he saw his fingers intertwined with hers, covered in blood, he felt a pang of pain. A ripple appeared in his eyes. After a long silence, Zero slowly lowered his body and touched the bed with his other hand. The filthy blood slowly disappeared. It was his child. He was cleaning up the body of their child. How could it be gone? While Zero was asleep, he had been suppressing his loss of control and was about to explode again. However, when his gaze fell on her pale face, he closed his eyes. He closed his eyes as if he had accepted his fate and calmed down as well. Maybe it was good that it was gone. She could not stand this kind of torment. It was a risky thing to do. At first, he wanted a child because he felt that the child was more important to him. However, later on she was more important. The existence of the child was more like a bomb. He carefully thought that he could handle it. However, this situation still happened. Fortunately, the adult was fine. Zero suppressed all his negative emotions and began to check her body. It might take some time for his superpower to recover after it was drained. There was nothing wrong with her body. Zero did not know what to feel, but he felt more relaxed. Wei Wei Bai raised a finger in disdain at the so-called no side effects. It was so painful that she almost jumped off the building. Fortunately, it did not hurt anymore and she even slept for a long time. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she saw a familiar place. It was her own room. A surge of energy came from her body. It was the power of her superpower. She recovered so quickly? The system said, You're awake. You slept for half a month. Wei Weibai said, slept for half a month. Didn't you say there were no side effects? The system said, it was the male lead who let you sleep and let you recover in your sleep. There are no side effects, but it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. After all, it would be unreal if it didn't hurt and people would complain. There was a reason why this thing was so popular in the supermarket. There were also hosts who took the path of torturing novels, torturing scum, and so on. He needed this thing to torture people or to frame a vixen. Therefore, if it didn't hurt, it wouldn't be real and he would be suspected. Wei Weibai moved her fingers and the familiar strength returned. She felt that her whole body was full of energy, just as he was feeling the power of his fingers. She suddenly felt a fluctuation in the air and immediately turned to look. She didn't know when Zero had appeared by her bedside, but there was a hint of confusion in his cold and emotionless eyes. Then he lowered his head slightly, his cold black hair covering his beautiful eyes. He silently came over and tucked her in. His movements were gentle and meticulous. It was as if he was worried that he would disturb her. Wei Weibai lowered her eyes and then looked up again as if she wanted to say something. However, Zero seemed to be worried about something. Suddenly he reached out and hugged her from behind. His aura became a little more chaotic. You're fine. He said these three simple words with a solemn tone. Wei Weibai moved her lips. She didn't feel sad at all, but she was suppressed by Zero's serious attitude. She rolled her eyes and wondered if she should cry a few times before she could finish what she started. He seemed to have felt her stiffening at that moment. His fingers gently touched her back. It was unbelievably gentle. Wei Weibai suddenly thought of 580. Her eyes narrowed and her hand gently touched Zero's back. Then she followed his back and touched down. The sides of his waist were soft. Chapter 22:10. Wei Weibai was still thinking about how to stab him, but Ling had already let go of her. Dehua was always more rational than emotional. He was only sad for a while and was more concerned about her body. Her ability was restored and her body began to improve. The health that was hollowed out by the child was gradually recovering. But the recovery speed was unexpectedly slow. He thought that so much nutrition from the Tree of Life could keep her body in a better state. But after the child was gone, he carefully examined her body and found the energy consumed by the child was surprisingly much. She looked healthy, but it was all an illusion. Even when the child was still there, she should have been in pain. But she didn't groan a word. It was simply a terrifying willpower. Ling thought that she was his creator. Before the child, she was also the best ability user in the base. This kind of strong perseverance was indeed her strength. It was a strength that he didn't like. If she was fragile again, he might have found that the Tree of Life didn't have enough nutrition, and she would have died after giving birth to the child. Ling looked at her with an extremely obscure gaze. Her expression was calm and didn't reveal a trace of sadness. It seemed that she was enduring and didn't want people to see her sadness. Ling had always had a calm attitude. His expression was still indifferent when he softened. His fingers gently stroked her hair and quietly rubbed her neck to check her pulse and heartbeat. After confirming that she was a little healthier, he sighed softly. Wei Weibai felt that it was a pity that the good opportunity just now had slipped away. She didn't show any unnecessary emotions. The child was gone, and crying for father and mother was really not her character. She would only silently endure the pain, licking her poor wounds alone in a corner. She told the system about her difficulties. The system told her to find a trash can to vomit. When the host was in character, she could still make people disgusted to a new level. The flash of pain between Wei Weibai's eyebrows was still very obvious. Ling stared at her and then silently looked away. He didn't speak, but his eyes were not as cold and calm as before. There was a sense of sadness on his white face that had never been there before. Zero reached out and held her finger. You've been sleeping for half a month. Get up and eat something, he said softly. In the past half a month, he had used his energy to help her comb her body. He was also using nutrient solutions to keep her alive. In this apocalypse, nutrient fluids were actually very good food. Many people didn't have the means to get fresh food, so they relied on nutrient solutions to survive. However, he knew that Wei Weibai did not like liquid nutrition. Zero also felt that it was better to eat nutrient fluids for a long period of time. It will affect the digestive system. Wei Weibai didn't have much of a reaction. She continued to eat the food he cooked calmly. Zero sat beside her and poured her juice. Wei Weibai picked it up and took a sip. Suddenly she frowned. Her teeth were sore. Zero reacted almost immediately. She liked wild fruit juice because the sour taste was just right. It could suppress the discomfort of pregnancy. Now that the child was gone, her taste had changed. She couldn't stand juice that was too sour. Zero clenched her fists and snapped her fingers. The juice was gone. It turned into pure milk. Wei Bai looked at the cup and was stunned. Finally she sighed and said, "Don't worry about me so much. The child is gone and my body has recovered. I'm not a porcelain doll." After saying that, she drank the milk in one gulp and got up to clean the table. Chapter 22:11. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming. You can come to Sashu.com in Baidu to find the S. She tidied up the table neatly, not giving Zero a chance to interfere. She changed her clothes. She was no longer wearing loose clothes, but the work clothes that were more suitable for walking around. She then put on a long white coat. Zero looked at her silently, but he did not try to persuade her. He just stood up and walked to her side. He followed her out. The superpowered people had succeeded, 4 of them had come out. The superpowers they controlled were also very special, which was a huge guarantee for the base. Of course, the base's biggest reliance in the apocalypse was Zero. Wei Bai recorded the superpowered people's training with a serious face, but in fact she was talking to the system about the best time to stab someone. The system said, "It's not suitable for your character to stab someone like that." Wei Bai was surprised. "You're actually worried about my character?" The system said, "I'm just thinking of a reason for you so that you won't fail when you stab someone." Wei Bai said, "That's right. After all, it's not stabbing someone to death, so there should be a reason. It would not make sense to stab someone for no reason." The system said, "Let me guess. It must be because the male lead made the apocalypse worse, so you want to kill your family for justice, or because you found out that 4th baby is dead and want to take revenge or something." Wei Bai was as calm as the wind. "You're done with the spoilers, so I won't do that." The system was speechless. Zero stood tall and silent beside Wei Bai. Just like her guardian, he was dazzling and powerful. His gaze fell on her face and found that she was in a daze. Of course, it was only for a moment and she returned to normal. The child was gone. It was good for her body, but it would affect her mood. This was a very normal situation. Zero pondered, how could he ease the mood of a woman who lost her child? This strange thought made him stunned for a few seconds. This was not a question he would think about. But it was normal to think about this kind of question. The successful appearance of the superpowered people, the expansion of the base, the increase of captives, and the abundance of resources. The civilian team took out the proposal for Wei Bai to take over as the person in charge of the base. The ceremony for the person in charge of a base was usually very simple and crude. After all, the apocalypse wasn't rich in resources, so it was best to save as much as possible. However, once the resources were plentiful, the inauguration ceremony would become more extravagant and complicated. This was because a base with abundant resources represented the strength of the base. The inauguration ceremony was also to announce the reputation of the person in charge of the base. In the apocalypse, only powerful bases would dare to do such a thing. Wei Bai took a look at the mission book and said calmly, "There have been too many things to do recently. Taking office?" A fair and slender finger pressed down on the folder and interrupted Wei Bai with a calm and steady voice. "How soon can the plan be ready?" Although the base had tacitly agreed that Wei Bai was the person in charge, she did not actually hold a succession ceremony. The clerk immediately said, "It will be ready by tomorrow night." Zero's long eyelashes covered her golden eyes, and her tone was a little more commanding. She tapped the folder with her finger and said, "Do your best." What he meant was that there was no need to be thrifty. The necessary steps could not be missed. The clerk immediately nodded. "Okay, we will do it right away." Zero's eyes were indifferent. Her finger left the folder, but her aura was unconsciously very oppressive. Wei Bai moved her lips as if she wanted to say something. Chapter 22:12. Ling turned around and leaned against the table with his fingers on the table. His expression that was still cold just now had a little more gentleness. "I don't want to wrong you." Wei Bai pursed her lips and a strange emotion flashed in her eyes. In the end she sighed and said, "Okay, as you wish." Ling stood up straight and then said in a calm tone, "Then let's go and pick out clothes." Wei Bai murmured, "It's really troublesome." Ling looked at her complaining with her head down and finally got a little more angry. He couldn't help but smile. He still liked her like this. Even if she was throwing a tantrum, it was better than her numb appearance. Ding, De Wa's favorability is at 75. The succession ceremony soon arrived. Wei Bai wore the long-sleeved uniform of the person in charge of the base. It had a beautiful collar and a simple and neat jacket. Her neutral dress was very delicate and neat. Her long hair was tied into a high ponytail and fell behind her. During this period of nourishment, her face had a little more healthy color and her lips were red. Zero's gaze lingered on her lips for 3 seconds, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. Then he elegantly stretched out his elbow and bowed his head, looking like a flower protector. Wei Bai glanced at him. The person in front of her was wearing a black slim suit. He was elegant and cold, handsome and fickle. Only to her he was a little more gentle. Under the bright lights he was like the most dazzling star. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before reaching out and putting her hand on his elbow and followed him to the red carpet. There were hundreds of people crowded on both sides of the carpet. They were the most important backbone personnel in the base. Everyone applauded happily. At the end of the carpet was a metal chair seat on a high platform. It was like a throne. Wei Bai looked at the throne and said calmly, "It's too troublesome. Just announce it directly." Ling's posture was gentle and his tone was light. "I've solved all the problems for you. You just need to enjoy it." Wei Bai stopped in her tracks. Her expression was a little gloomy, but she quickly revealed a smile. "I still remember how you were when you just broke out of your shell. You are much more mature now. You can even make decisions for yourself." These words were truly heart-rending. However, she said it in an unusually calm tone. It sounded like a joke. Zero didn't seem to understand the reproach in her tone. Instead, he smiled and said, "Because I need to share your burden." They had already reached their seats. Wei Bai stared at the seat and suddenly looked at him coldly. "What if I don't need you to share the burden?" Zero stretched out his hand and pressed down on the back of her hand that was on his elbow with his well-defined fingers. He suppressed it as if he was making a promise. He softened his tone and said, "I don't want you to suffer." The environment of the apocalypse was tough for anyone. If he didn't interfere, she would have to rely on him to maintain a base. She would be busy to death. Zero would not let her spend all her time on the base. He wanted her to focus all her energy on him. This kind of impulse and possessiveness had always been there. That was why he quietly and slowly took over her power. The people in the base all saw him as a god. He could even simply deprive her of any responsibility and power so that she wouldn't be so tired. So it was normal for her to suddenly feel insecure. Zero calmly analyzed the pros and cons, but he still couldn't say that he wouldn't help her manage the base. Even if he knew that it would make her feel at ease. He couldn't. After Wei Bai heard his words, her body seemed to stiffen. Chapter 22:13. She seemed to think that he wanted to compete with her for power. In the end, she seemed to accept her fate and said, "I like it here. This is the place where I was born and raised." Zero gracefully bent down, held her hand and pushed her back to her seat. Then like a knight, he slowly and beautifully bent down on one knee. There was a gentle smile in his eyes. This was a gesture of absolute submission. He held her fingers so that everyone could see them. That godlike youth had a straight back. His black hair flowed with the light of the night, and his side profile was stunning. He slowly lowered his head, sincere but not humble, elegant but not small. Just like that, he imprinted a kiss on the back of her hand. "You are my creator. You are the beautiful existence that I instinctively acknowledge." His voice was soft, revealing his heart for the first time. As if he could see her uneasiness. "I will help you protect the place you love, and I can also be your knife." For Zero's powerful and rational main personality, when he said this, it was the most sincere. He wanted to get her. He also wanted to protect her. These two feelings existed at the same time. He didn't want her to doubt him. Wei Bai looked down at him. She blinked and pursed her thin lips. She hesitated, but she slowly nodded in the end. Although she hesitated, there was a trace of trust in her eyes. Zero couldn't help but smile, and his golden eyes became much clearer. Ding, Dewa's favorability is at 80. The succession ceremony was held without a hitch. Especially the scene of Zero submitting to Bai Weiwei, which made everyone at the base notice Bai Weiwei. Because Zero was too dazzling, Weiwei Bai, the person in charge, was overshadowed. But in this ceremony, this dazzling youth was willing to kneel. Everyone knew the importance of Weiwei Bai's position. Weiwei Bai's work was also much smoother. The base had expanded a lot and most of the monsters had disappeared. Weiwei Bai began to send people to study how to restore the vitality of the land. However, after this research he discovered a very terrifying thing. During this period of time, all the relatively important remaining forests and grasslands had basically withered. It was as if his life force was being sucked away by something. This made the apocalyptic ecology even worse. Weiwei Bai stared at the data and rubbed the bridge of her nose in confusion. She gently held her fingers with one hand. Zero sat beside her with an indifferent expression. Don't rub it. It's a bad habit. Wei Wei Bai loosened her fingers and closed her eyes to rest. Her voice was soft and gentle. Can't the earth recover its vitality? Zero replied calmly, yeah, that's how apocalyptic environments are. Wei Wei Bai opened her bright eyes. But my dream is to leave the base, end the apocalypse and restore humanity to its former life. Zero was calm and indulgent. That's a good idea. If you succeed, everyone will sing your praises. Wei Wei Bai smiled. That's my dream. I want to become the god of this apocalypse. After saying that, she mischievously ran her finger across his face. But you're their god. The apocalypse worshipped power crazily. Zero had become the most worshipped person of all apocalyptic humans. Even if he was loyal to her, she still appeared ordinary under his light. However, Zero held onto her slender wrist and leaned forward a little. His voice was a little more hoarse than usual. But you're my god. .. At the bottom to record this reading. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 22:14. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled and her face turned red. Zero's eyes were cold as he let go of her indifferently, as if the disturbing words just now were not said by him. The days passed unhurriedly. Wei Wei Bai did not show any expression, but occasionally observed Zero with complicated emotions. Zero still looked indifferent, but from time to time he would start to do some little things. To hug her or hold her hand. In the Doomsday base, Zero's prestige was getting stronger and stronger. Most of the base's affairs were handled by him. Unbeknownst to her, her work was getting less and less. In Zero's mind, she did not need to waste energy on things that he could do. He liked the feeling of handling things for her. Bai Weiwei didn't protest. As usual, when it was time to take a holiday, she would take a holiday. When it was time to eat, she would eat and drink. However, she was still very active in the creation of psychics. She heard that a new psychic had appeared. Wei Wei Bai pulled Zero and ran over excitedly. Zero saw the excitement on her face. You like them very much? Wei Wei Bai nodded without hesitation. Psychics are the strongest weapons for survival in the apocalypse. Zero was extremely calm and did not refute, because he was the strongest psychic. If she liked this kind of weapon the most, then he should be her favorite. After looking at the psychics, she walked to the experiment hall with Zero. The broken culture tank in the middle of the hall was rebuilt. It was still empty. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with nostalgia. At that time you were born here. Zero looked at the culture tank indifferently and did not say anything. Wei Wei Bai opened the culture tank. The liquid inside only reached her ankles. She called Zero over. Do you still remember this place? Zero leaned over and glanced at the culture tank. The smell of the nutrient liquid was a little unknown due to the transparent glass. He was about to go back, but his movements were sluggish. The gas in the culture tank was an extremely strong anesthetic. Moreover, it was a newly developed drug that could anesthetize psychics' nerves. In fact, it didn't have much effect on him. It only slowed down his reaction a little. Then his body immediately adapted to the drug. The reason why he didn't turn around was because a knife had been stabbed into his back. The incomparably cold blade pierced through his bones and into his flesh. It was only 1 centimeter away from his beating heart. The dagger was still too short. Otherwise, it would have pierced his heart and caused him to be severely injured. As for his creator, her body was almost pressed against his back, and that familiar fragrance lingered around him. Her face was pressed against his shoulder. From afar, it was an exceptionally intimate action. Her voice was still gentle and calm. Zero, the apocalypse does need a deity, but it doesn't need 2 deities. My dream is to unite all of humanity in the apocalypse and become the sole ruler. The dagger in her hand did not tremble at all. I don't need a weapon stronger than me. Zero finally realized something, and the power in his body began to go out of control. That dagger had devoured his power. The violent power was torn apart and disappeared. Zero's eyes turned violent. He crushed the glass tank with his fingers. His voice was still calm, but there was a trace of tension in it. What you want, I can give you. Her calm and cruel voice came from behind him. Unfortunately, I don't need you to give it to me. Also, the Zero I wanted from the beginning was that child. That child has disappeared, so there is no need for you to exist. Zero's thin lips trembled. So she knew. The weak personality had disappeared. He thought that she didn't believe it. Wei Wei Bai's voice was gentle and sad. Sleep, my proudest work. Zero slowly closed his eyes. His long hair fell down, almost covering half of his face. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that she had succeeded and made him lose all his power. Under that dark long hair, he suddenly slowly raised the corner of his mouth, which was cold and terrifying. For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the below to record this reading record. Chapter 22:15. When Wei Wei Bai stabbed the dagger into Zero's body. The notification that the mission completion rate was increasing rang in her ears. She was about to run out of energy. She felt a sense of oppression. After all, she had successfully completed the mission. Furthermore, Zero did not resist. Could it be? She was so successful that he was willing to offer his head just to get a smile from her? Thinking about it this way, she was really a calamity that could cause the downfall of a city. When the mission notification reached 90% completion and the dagger was about to disappear due to the powerful backlash. All the wires suddenly exploded. The coiled wires flashed and jumped in the air. The laboratory fell into darkness. Because there was no light source, the windows opened automatically. The gray light of day shone in. The bad feeling in Wei Wei Bai's heart grew stronger. She pulled out the dagger almost a second before she was about to complete the side quest. Then, without hesitation, she turned and ran. The system wanted to ask why she suddenly pulled out the dagger and ran when there was only 1 second left. Wasn't this a waste of effort? But in the next moment, a violent power came from nowhere. It violently tore the space apart. The laboratory became a hell of spatial cracks. There were large and small cracks everywhere in the air. A dark and ominous power was crazily drawn out from those spatial cracks. It rushed into the wound that was caused by the dagger. This power was too terrifying. Just now, if Bai Weiwei hadn't run fast enough, not to mention 1 second, even if it was 0.1 seconds, she would have been torn to pieces. All the equipment in the laboratory exploded. The fire and darkness were at the same time. Zero stood in the same spot. His hair had completely turned silver. The hunger in his third personality was completely forced out. The main personality and second personality were not asleep. But because he had lost too much power, the power of hunger took over. Zero's gray eyes slowly turned. They were cold and cruel like a giant beast. His beautiful and cruel eyes gave off a bone-chilling feeling in the light. The power of space that was torn apart rushed into his body crazily. If he had been absorbing the power of life, his personality might have gradually become like the main personality. When it reached maturity, it would naturally fuse with all of its personalities. Because his temperament was absorbing life force, it was filled with the gentleness of the forest. Naturally, he could become an angelic figure. Just like the weakest character that Wei Wei Bai liked the most. At that time he would be mature, gentle, strong, and even kind. This was the nature of the earth. That was why the primary persona knew that there was more power in the spatial rift. He refused to move. Because this kind of power would allow them to finally mature. He had completely turned into a demon. Zero stretched out his hand and pulled out the power within the crack, absorbing it into his body. The enormous power was so crazy that it was almost impossible to digest it. He even felt pain and wounds began to appear on his body. Cracks appeared on his skin and blood gushed out. If they don't fuse in advance, they will become mature. In that case, he would not be able to digest this enormous power and would destroy him. Zero ignored the voice of the main personality urging him to fuse. Instead, he turned around and walked through the flames, stepping on the mess on the ground. He walked out step by step, covered in blood. Before the fusion, he had to find her. More blood gushed out of Zero's body, and wounds began to appear on his face. Chapter 22:16. The power was about to burst his body. The hungry personality was still smelling something. He suddenly smelled her scent. Wei Wei Bai saw that the one stab did not complete the side mission and immediately ran as far as she could. You said that 588 could absorb all the power in one stab. The system said, it could, but I didn't expect it to be so useless that it would need so much time. Wei Wei Bai used her ability and wanted to jump further away. She had to avoid Zero, who had lost control. How is Zero now? I took away 95% of its power. Did it stop going crazy? It's weak and dying in the lab. If it was really dying. It was not too late to go back and finish it off. This dagger only had a little bit of power left. She did not know if she could stab it again. The system looked at Zero and suddenly shouted, behind you, behind you. Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows twitched. Behind me. Just as she finished speaking, a beast-like shadow suddenly pounced on her from behind. It pushed her to the ground. The place where Wei Wei Bai escaped was already a wasteland of yellow sand. She ate a mouthful of sand like a dog eating shit. Her bones were almost crushed. Yellow sand flew all over the sky. In the dust, a thick smell of blood followed the shadows and completely suppressed by Wei Wei, who was about to escape. Wei Wei Bai of course would not let herself be captured. It was not a matter of character design. It was just that the current Zero was in his beast form. If she did not wait for him to calm down, it would be difficult for her to communicate with him. The man behind her had a chaotic and heavy breath. His voice, along with the blood on his body, had a kind of crazy and desperate pain. Hungry? Dead. Hungry. This kind of hunger was a hunger that threatened his life. His whole body was filled with unbearable pain. In addition, he had absorbed a huge amount of violent energy from the space, which was killing in his body. The hungry personality was tortured by hunger after his power was taken away. On the other hand, he was tortured by the pain of being too full to digest. Under the double torture, his gray eyes were sharp and dry. Wei Wei Bai sensed that he was trembling in pain. She immediately found a flaw and tore open a space crack, disappearing in place. But before she could run away, the spatial crack suddenly appeared again, and she was violently thrown out. Wei Wei Bai rolled a few times in the sand and hid behind a rock. Her eyes were full of fear. "Why can't I use my power?" the system whispered. "Because the male lead stole a large amount of space energy, he is now the master of the most powerful space energy in this world." Wei Wei Bai said, "Tiskege, how can I not know this? I have to pretend to be pitiful or Zero will tear me apart." After saying that, Wei Wei Bai was even more scared and hid behind the stone. After losing her powers, she was just an ordinary girl. In the base there were at least various barriers for protection. But now he had nothing and was thrown into the sand of the apocalypse. Zero seemed to sense her fear. He grinned, but it was not cute at all. There was only a hideous expression on his face. The primary personality urged him to fuse, digest, and recover. And he couldn't hurt her. Why not? She didn't want them anymore. She wanted to destroy them. Why couldn't he drag her down with him? The hungry personality crazily nurtured a terrifying thought in his heart. After the fusion, the primary personality would be the real mature body. But would the mature him still be the current him? T. Chapter 22:17. His bloody finger fell heavily on the big rock. His voice became strangely gentle. "Wei Wei, come out and play with me, I'll take you to eat something delicious." So before the fusion he would eat her first. Then he would really have her. It wasn't the main personality, nor was it the mature entity that had fused. The girl behind the rock was silent, but the sound of her breathing became heavier. Zero narrowed his eyes. His gray eyes were like the greediest and most dangerous poisonous snake. As for his finger, he gently rubbed the stone. The rock began to turn into powder. In the powder he saw Wei Wei Bai's frightened and pale face. He tilted his head and smiled cutely but also terrifyingly. Then he easily reached out and grabbed her ankle. He dragged her back as she was about to escape. Wei Wei Bai fiercely stretched out her other leg and kicked his face. "Go away, lunatic." Zero easily reached out and blocked her ankle, and even took the opportunity to completely suppress her. The blood on his body fell on her body. It was like a rose blooming. It was so fragrant that the hungry personality couldn't help but sniff her skin. His eyes were sharp and he was extremely excited. Even Wei Wei Bai was stunned by this scene. This was like a half-starved beast catching a fresh prey. He would definitely open his mouth and take a few bites. Wei Wei Bai was really scared now. She immediately asked Tong Zi, "He's not really going to eat people, right?" System, seems like probably it seems like it. Wei Wei Bai, then she felt a sharp pain in her arm. Sanhua actually bit her arm, those sharp teeth piercing into her flesh. This pain made Wei Wei Bai suck in a breath of cold air. She almost roared. She was in so much pain that her face was pale. A bunch of thoughts flashed through her mind, but none of them could be realized. She was so miserably tricked by 508, she thought that she could immediately end the invasion of this plane after succeeding. Was this not tricking her? The more she went on, the more accidents there were. What was going on? Could it be that she had really been blacklisted by the main system? Before Wei Wei Bai could figure it out, Ling suddenly paused. His hair turned blue and his eyes turned red. Erwa came out. Wei Wei Bai was so happy to see Erwa for the first time. No matter how unreliable Erwa was, he shouldn't have bitten her. Zero's charming eyes were filled with a hint of dark cruelty. Be it the primary personality or him, there was no way they would allow the hungry personality to monopolize her. Therefore, the primary personality gave up on the idea of fusing with him first. Instead, it released him and started to dissolve the hungry personality. He unhurriedly used his fingers to pinch her wound. Seeing how she was enduring the pain, he sneered. Aya, it turns out that my Weiwei is so ambitious. She wants to be a god? He lowered his head and spoke in a voice that made people tremble in fear. How pitiful. You always can't recognize how weak you are. Arrogance and stupidity have covered your eyes. You can't even escape from my pursuit. After the pain subsided, Weiwei Bai managed to keep a clear head. Her eyes were clear and sober. The winner takes all. Kill me if you want. Ling was stunned. Then he couldn't help but laugh. How can I bear to kill you? If you can't be a god, you can change your profession. His fingers slowly tore open her wound. Her clothes were stuck to it. His fingertips were ambiguous but unusually cold. His blood mixed with hers. It was incomparably beautiful. You can try being a god's slave. Chapter 22:18. This sentence made Weiwei Bai's pupils dilate, and she began to struggle as if her hair was standing on end. Go away, let me go. But it was too late. Betrayal was born with pain and despair. The children who were betrayed by their creator used their own pain to bite back at the one who maintained their fledgling complex. Yellow sand danced in the air. In the dim yellow world there seemed to be the sound of tearing and struggling. The smell of blood was very obvious, but it was more of a kind of absolute oppression and torture of the strong to the weak. The system looked at the bullet screen that filled the sky, and at first, it was confused. Then it was terrified. Damn, did the host get eaten alive by Sanhua? As a result, the scene was too brutal to watch. No, wasn't Erwa released by the primary personality to suppress Sanhua? Erwa bullet screen. Thinking about it, it was even more brutal. When Weiwei Bai opened her eyes, she saw a blurry black shadow in front of her. In the dim light, on the chair not far away, the slender and perfect figure seemed to be in another world. Golden hair fell on the chair, and the exquisite eyes that were more stunning than the sun had a hint of lethargy and indifference. The faint light on his body was like a pair of gray wings. Weiwei Bai blinked and suddenly thought of something, and a sharp sense of disgust appeared in her eyes. Her breathing quickened, but she still suppressed it. But soon she saw that the place she was lying on was not right. The soft carpet was as soft as feathers. Green vines spread from the door to behind her. She recognized it, it was the prison vine. The vines were terrifyingly fresh and green. The healthier and fresher the vines were, the more powerful they were. Weiwei Bai clenched her fist and finally cried, Tongzi, the prison vine is here. The system said earnestly, you're used to it, it's just a refresher. Weiwei Bai said, I think it's not just imprisonment, there are many things that can't be said and don't dare to ask will happen. The system said, do you want to buy a substitute sticker for you? Weiwei Bai said, is there a discount? The system replied, no. Weiwei Bai, forget it then. Weiwei Bai said, by the way, remember to complain to the supermarket. Just say that they sold me fake items and that the dagger didn't work. The system replied, I did. After stabbing him once, he ended up stabbing a blackened hornet's nest. It stung her until her head was full of bumps. Weiwei Bai did not want to recall the scene in the yellow sand at all. Second baby's sudden attack and terrifying torture were in line with his character. But just as she was about to collapse, his movements became gentler. When she opened her eyes, Dewa had returned. Not waiting for her to think about how to use Dewa's rational character to have a normal communication. What the deranged main personality did next was exactly the same as his shameless second personality who destroyed his 3 viewpoints. Thinking back to when he first came here. When Dewa had just a little bit of affection for her, she took the initiative to throw herself at him. He was so young and pure. Until now, Weiwei Bai thought, what schizophrenia? What multiple personalities? They were all lies. It was all a lie. Their personalities were all worse than beasts. Except for her 4th baby. After Weiwei Bai finished lamenting, she saw a pair of feet already in front of her. She was lying on the thick carpet. Her body had lost all strength, and she could barely open her eyes and turn her head to look at him. It was still Zero's face, but it was more mature and had grown a lot. In the delicacy there was a sense of oppression. Seeing that Weiwei Bai had woken up, his thick eyelashes drooped, and his tired eyes finally brightened up a little. He sat down slowly and reached out to touch her face gently. You're awake. His voice was even more pleasant, like a sigh but also like some kind of beautiful music. Do you want anything? Weiwei Bai looked at him for a while, then suddenly turned her head away and said coldly, no need, how long do you want to torture me for? Zero slowly reached out and pinched her face so that she could not escape. He was clearly smiling, but there was no gentleness in his words. Don't ignore me in the future, don't ignore me or I'll get angry. By Weiwei. At the crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Com download fast, read the full text. 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 Fast, comma. Chapter 22:19. These words were actually a bit childish. But the man in front of her was abnormally calm, as if these words were very normal. She lowered her eyes and didn't look at him, but her pale fingers were grabbing the carpet and her body was slightly trembling. Zero lowered his head to look at her and the tiredness in his eyes appeared again. His fingers ran through her long hair and along the strands he touched her neck. It was gentle and dark. Then he laid down beside her. His golden hair was entwined with hers and it was so beautiful that it made people hold their breaths. Wei Bai's body was stiff and she didn't look at him at all. Zero's expression was still calm, but his fingers grabbed her waist and pulled her into his embrace. His fingertips gently came to the side of her face. When he gently touched it, it was as if he was touching some fragile flower petals. Some of the vines and flowers bloomed and there was a sweet scent in the air. Zero's aura was like these flowers with a kind of fickle fragrance. Wei, you created me. His tone was light and pious. Wei Bai said in a cold and cruel voice, so this is how you treat your creator? I would rather not have created you. Zero's fingers slightly paused and his tone became gentle, but I am so glad that you are my creator. If someone else had created me, they would have been destroyed by me. It wasn't someone who came to be his chick complex. He would admit to it. Everything seemed to be just right. When he saw her, no matter how calm his heart was, it would also cause ripples to appear. Until now, it had already turned into a surging wave. It drowned out all possibilities for him to escape. Zero gently leaned against her and looked at the side of her face. His tone was gentle and tender. It was you who made me fall in love with you. Whether it was intentional or not, this was your mistake. Then you didn't dare to admit your mistake and even wanted to kill me to avoid your responsibility. Wei Bai frowned and interrupted him sternly, I didn't really want to kill you. I just wanted you to completely lose your power. That way everyone's eyes will focus on me again, and you won't steal everything away. When the system heard the host's words, it couldn't help but say, wow, don't dig up the wound. Hurry up and pretend to be a little innocent flower. Just say that you were blinded and accidentally stabbed him. You won't lose out if you admit your mistake. What kind of situation was this? Why did he insist on being the god of the end of the century? Wasn't this the same as stabbing a knife into the male lead's heart? Wei Bai's face was full of tears. I stabbed him so ruthlessly and said such ruthless words. Now you're saying that you didn't do it on purpose. Who are you trying to fool? She also wanted to be a little white flower. But he couldn't change his character every day. She was not Zero. Her body was squeezed with several personalities. If she didn't say harsh words now, Ling might think that she had ulterior motives and wanted to deceive him. Therefore, even if he didn't say anything ruthless, he would still die. He might as well say some harsh words and have some fun. The system was silent for a while. Let me tell you some good news. Wei Bai asked, is the supermarket going to refund my money? The system said, no, it's that the male lead's favorability is 95. Wei Bai, what kind of shocking good news was this? It had inexplicably increased to 95. She had only stabbed him once, but he had done that to her. How did the favorability soar so high? The system said, because after the personality fusion, the host will bear the additional favorability of all the personalities. I didn't think that the total favorability of all 4 personalities would increase to 95. The Chapter 22:20. This was also why the main storyline mission only required 70 points of favorability. Because in the end, it would add up to almost 100 favorability points. Wei Bai, who had a phobia of increasing favorability points, thought, although it's good news, it's still unsettling to see the favorability points increase so quickly. The system said, there's more bad news. Wei Bai said, I don't want to hear it. The system said, congratulations, you're pregnant. Wei Bai, the system said, I told you you'll get pregnant if you do it again. Wei Bai held her head in despair, feeling like 1,000 groundhogs were screaming in her head. She thought of the beastly coercion in the yellow sand. At that time, she had actually forgotten that something could get pregnant. She even refused to buy substitute stickers. At this moment she finally knew what stinginess meant. She had brought this upon herself. This time it wasn't an air ball. It was a real child. Did the system see that she didn't have enough men, so it wanted her to start having children? She had a baby, and once the mission was completed, she had to leave. She felt horrified just thinking about it. Her baby was in a certain time and space, making scarecrows with her target, cursing her to die a horrible death. There was no way she could continue this mission. She wanted to go on strike. The system saw that the host was about to break down, and it understood how she felt. It comforted her. You didn't do it on purpose, you were forced. If this happened in reality, the police would be able to arrest the criminal beside you. Let's abort the child, it's a criminal's child. Wei Bai, she thought that she was bad enough, but the system was even more heartless than her. She thought that she couldn't raise the baby, and that the baby would hate her. In the end, the system's solution was to just strangle the baby in her stomach, and then there would be no problem raising it. The system said, seeing you in so much pain, I'll tell you some good news to cheer you up. Wei Bai asked, are you constipated? The words came out one by one. The system said, the male lead's power has eaten away the rule power of the main system, but it hasn't been done yet. Because his power is unstable when he does it with you, the child will only squeeze out the air ball after a month. Wei Bai caught the main point. So, you can just abort the child within a month. That was not her child. It was just an empty balloon. This was because Zero's power would not invade her body within this month. Therefore the embryo did not germinate. The system said, you can abort the child within a month? Wei Bai. Do you want some medicine? The system said, it's no use. The male lead's ability is very strong. Even if you use drugs, you can only get rid of the empty balloon. Once the balloon is gone, the real embryo will develop. Therefore once the medicine was used, she was really pregnant. Wei Bai was still nagging the system on how to prevent herself from getting pregnant. However, the man behind her had already propped himself up and was almost covering her body. A shadow shrouded his face. In the half-light and half-shadow, there was an incomprehensible emotion surging in his golden eyes. It was both hot and cold. Being single-minded was a struggle. His lips slowly curled up. Why are you so determined to be a god? You're not capable enough. Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. There was a flash of embarrassment in her eyes. Before you appeared, I was the strongest in the base. After you appeared, I started to be jealous of you. Her eyes were red as she said this. It seemed like she was angry, but it was more like she was vulnerable. 0 to coldness. Jealousy is the most useless emotion. Wei Bai was anxious and asked coldly, have you never been jealous? Chapter 22-21. Zero's delicate and flawless face froze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, his cold voice carrying a trace of dark evil. Yes, I am jealous that you set your eyes on anyone and anything other than me. Including this world that makes you want to become a god. Wei Bai looked at him as if he was teasing her. Then she got up angrily and pushed him away. If you have time to talk nonsense like this, why don't we end this? Zero did not struggle. Instead he looked innocent and calm. He supported himself on the carpet and looked at her indifferently. It was as if he was looking at an insensible child. The embarrassment in Wei Bai's eyes were clearly seen by his cold and calm eyes. He even saw despair and desolation in her eyes. His existence was like a reminder of her failure. After Zero's fusion, the mature body would have a period of fatigue. All kinds of intense emotions or reactions would be suppressed. This would ensure that he could rest after fusion to the greatest extent. But even during such a stressful and tiring period, seeing her so sad, his heart was still throbbing with pain. After the fragments of memories of the 4 personalities merged, it was like a huge sharp blade. It completely pierced through his original personality. The good feelings and love that the main personality could suppress exploded all of a sudden. All those repressed feelings quickly broke through the hard shell of his heart and unscrupulously took over everything in him. If it wasn't for the period of fatigue, his love for her, it would be even crazier. After Wei Bai looked at him in annoyance, she turned around and was about to leave when a hand gently grabbed her loose pants. If Wei Bai didn't stop in time, her pants were pulled down by him. Wei Bai resisted the urge to pull down her pants and said to the system, Is Zero angry? I have enough hatred, right? The system was confused. Why do you have hatred? Wei Bai, to make him so angry that he kicked me into the wall. This way, without the use of drugs, not to mention the air ball, even the baby that hasn't grown out yet will be gone. System, how great was this hatred? He thought that it was already very inhumane to get rid of the child, but he didn't expect that the child's father would get rid of the child. The host still had the nerve to look down on his character? Before Wei Wei Bai could hear the system's reply, Zero's fingers had already moved up and grabbed her calf. He rubbed his fingertips together, and there was a kind of possessive stickiness in the calm. She frowned. Just as she was about to lift her foot, she was worried that Ling would not let go. His pants were really pulled down. That scene would definitely be very ugly, and she would be done for no matter how hard she tried to act cool. So Wei Wei Bai stiffened and said coldly, "Let go." Zero did not say anything. Instead, he maintained his posture in silence. Wei Wei Bai turned around angrily and was about to say something. However, he saw Zero tilting her head up slightly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with bottomless longing. His long hair fell to the ground, and his golden eyes were gentle. Because his head was raised, his fragile and elegant neck was exposed. This posture was unexpectedly submissive. Zero's voice was hoarse as he said softly, "Why did you give up on me? You don't have to treat me as your enemy, your opponent, or even as a human." Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with shock. She had no idea why he would say something like that. It was so humble that it was shocking. The tiredness in Zero's eyes was even more obvious after his personality had matured. Chapter 22. His body was filled with greed for her, affection, joy, sadness, protection, possession. There was also paranoid madness. In the yellow sand that filled the sky, when his various personalities began to merge. He even had a terrible impulse to look at her face full of broken tiredness and disgust. He wanted to completely merge her into his body. Never be separated. This was an idea that was even more terrifying than the hungry personality eating her. He didn't even want to let go of her soul. From that moment on, he knew that he was twisted. His existence was only for her. This fate might have started when she was the first to walk into the blank space of his consciousness. At that time, she was branded in his subconscious. They couldn't be separated. Creeped out by his gaze, Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of wavering anxiety. "I never thought of you as a human. You are a monster that I created." Zero saw the wavering and hesitation in her eyes. She didn't seem to believe in his feelings and was afraid that he would lie to her. That was why she wanted to destroy him. He still had the same sentimental and innocent posture, gently pressing his face against her leg. This posture of hugging her leg was done by a good-looking person. It was simply beautiful and seductive to the extreme. His voice was unusually soft, calm and bewitching, contradictory and strangely beautiful. "Yes, I was created by you, so you never have to be afraid that I will betray you." She lowered her head to look at him, the anxiety on her face more obvious. She seemed to want to believe it, but in the end she didn't dare to believe it. She forced herself to hold on, the corners of her mouth raised into a cold smile. "Your not betrayal is to lock me up." Zero was silent for a while, then smiled and said matter-of-factly, "I won't betray you, but I also want you to not betray me." Her betrayal was to escape from him. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly and suddenly wanted to kick him away. But she couldn't raise her leg. The cold vines began to spread, wrapping around her ankle. Zero looked at her indifferently. His posture was fragile just now, but now it was calm and cruel. A mature personality, with the memories of all the personalities, eroded the real main body. His emotions were unusually unstable. "Never push me away, I don't like it." Wei Wei Bai felt that all this was ridiculous. She reached out and grabbed his hair. She lowered her head and looked at him coldly. "Is it fun to take revenge on me like this? I want to kill you, so you thought of a new way to torture me and make me wish I was dead?" The confusion and panic in her eyes were so obvious. She could not comprehend his terrible paranoia. Zero's long butterfly-like eyelashes trembled slightly. Then he slowly stared at her. Her bone-piercing gaze was indifferent, cold, heartless, proud and pure. It caused people to tremble incessantly. But gradually, his eyes were filled with a dark, abyss-like emotion. His violent emotions had destroyed all of his calm arrogance. He reached out his hands and forcefully and gently grasped her fingers that were tugging at his hair. Then he pressed his face against her palm. Like a fragile child, they needed to be comforted by their loved ones. His lashes swept over her trembling palm. "If you want to be a god, then I will conquer this world and make everyone in this world crawl under my feet. I will become everyone's god." Wei Wei Bai's face was a little pale. She thought that he was announcing her failure. But in the next second, he pressed his lips against her palm. His magnetic and cold voice was paranoid and affectionate. "As for you, you will become a god to me alone. I will conquer the world and become a god. And you will be my god. Chapter 22-23. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, come to search book. www.sashu.com. In Baidu to find the S. Become a god, a crazy god? Weiwei by 8 while looking at Zero torturing the plants and animals outside, including humans. After all, to become a god, one must beat others until they were convinced. The confinement vine was very powerful, and her superpower was useless. It was not the child's problem, but the fact that Zero had locked down the space energy, which meant that all her powers were tied up. Her only pleasure now was eating, playing with blocks, and reading. She would chat with the system about how to get rid of the child within a month. She would also check on what Zero was doing through the system. After a few times she felt that she should not look. She was a brave person, but she looked at what Zero was doing. She was terrified. He was really going to become a god, and he had unified all the bases outside. He had opened up new lands, captured monsters, and studied life force. Everyone who saw him would kneel and kowtow all the way. Those who did not obey him were all dead. Those who did not obey him were all hiding underground. Even so, they were still found by Zero. After the personality fusion, Zero had second baby's bewitching methods, eldest baby's absolute intelligence, and third baby's cruelty. Fourth baby's life skills? Bai Weiwei expressionlessly picked up the milk and slowly drank it. There were familiar wild fruits in the milk, and Zero knew that she was pregnant. This was a fucked up plane. Did she come to this plane to be a crazy, irresponsible mother who thought about how to get rid of the child every day? The system said, "You're going to give birth in half a month. You're going to have it." Weiwei Bai said, "I don't have the ability now. I can't go out, I can't fight, and I can't even harm myself." There were some transparent threads on her fingers and legs. They could only be barely seen under the light. These were air threads, and when not in use they did not hinder people at all. After all, no one had ever heard of walking around in the air and feeling that it was difficult to move. It was scary whenever she wanted to go on a hunger strike, harm herself, or make a scene by biting her tongue. These threads would become terrifying puppet threads that would control her and prevent her from harming herself, allowing her to eat as usual. Even if she didn't sleep, she would still be manipulated to sleep on the bed. If she couldn't fall asleep, he would gently use medication to force her to sleep. Weiwei Bai expressed that she finally understood what it felt like to be a puppet. It was too scary. How did this ability evolve? The strings of the puppet completely cut off the possibility of her doing whatever she wanted. Weiwei Bai said to the system, "Ever since the fusion of the two personalities, it's like the combination of a sickly and blackened person." While holding her thighs, he begged her not to leave. At the same time, he coldly gave her a bunch of puppet strings just because she was hungry. What a freak. The system replied, "It's okay, you're used to it." Weiwei Bai, listen, is this what the system is saying? Is there still true love in this world? After she finished the milk, she quietly opened the book and continued to read. The current Zero wasn't easy to fool, so when he couldn't find any breakthrough points, she wouldn't mess around. The dagger still had a little power left, so it probably wouldn't be useful to Zero. But when she remembered that it was 580, she felt that it would be good to keep it as a souvenir. She bought the most expensive and the most useless thing. Halfway through the book, the door that couldn't be opened. A powerful and cold figure slowly appeared under the shroud of the light. Weiwei Bai looked up and saw Zero in a black robe. The robe fell to his ankles, casting a beautiful shadow. Download the at https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 22-24. He was like a golden deity, his expression indifferent and lifeless. But when his gaze landed on her body, ripples appeared in his golden eyes and they softened. "Weiwei, I'm back." His voice merged with the sound of the door closing as he walked in. It gave off a dark and domineering aura. Weiwei Bai did not say anything, nor did she greet him. She even ignored him. The thin strings of air could only control her movements but not her voice. Hence, if Zero wanted to hear a warm welcome, it was impossible. Zero slowly lowered his body. She was sitting on the carpet, leaning against the cushion. However, he lay down and gently rested his head on her lap. His beautiful golden eyes narrowed in satisfaction. At this moment, he was more like a child who had just returned from a long day of running around. The urge to act spoiled was very strong. Zero murmured, "Weiwei, I've taken down a few more bases for you. The integration of the Doomsday bases is almost complete." He wanted to be everyone's leader, everyone's god and king. First, he had to have a decent land. The land of the doomsday bases were those bases. And the people in the bases. And to Zero, those people were their future subjects. Wei Bai was calm and had no intention of talking to him. Ever since Zero started to wrap the puppet strings around her body, she had been in a cold war with him. They had been in a cold war for more than a week. Zero did not care as long as she was around and did not run away. Eating well and sleeping well was enough. He slowly closed his eyes as if he was tired. Not long after, the sound of peaceful breathing could be heard. Wei Bai asked, "Is he really asleep?" The system replied, "He's asleep, but as long as you move, he'll definitely wake up." Zero's reflexes were not something a human could have. Wei Bai said, "So secretive. Am I really going to be a scumbag mother?" The system said, "It's rare to have the experience of being a mother. Why don't you try?" Wei Bai said, "After I try, can I still stuff it back in if I regret it?" The system was speechless. The image was too strong and he couldn't bear to look at it directly. Wei Bai said, "Forget it, I'll find my own entertainment. I'm going to become a monkey in the zoo if I'm locked up every day." After saying that, he looked at Zero, who was sleeping soundly. He slowly reached out his hand to touch the necklace on his neck. The necklace was a key. The key that unlocks the door that holds her captive. She carefully unlocked the key and held it in her hand. Zero was still in a deep sleep, as if he was exhausted from the outside world. However, the imprisoning vines didn't move either. She gently moved aside and gave him the cushion to use as a pillow. Then she tiptoed to the door. He inserted the key into the keyhole and with a click, the door opened. Wei Bai was overjoyed. She pushed open the door and was about to step out. However, he suddenly froze. What was outside the door was not yellow sand, nor was it the base. Instead, it was an unfamiliar garden. A transparent protective shield enveloped the entire place. In front of the door there were ancient roses. It was almost like a flower field, full of brilliant flowers. It was simply stunning and extravagant. She stood at the door, the sunlight shining on her body. Her eyes were clear and filled with surprise. When she realized that she was about to escape, a pair of hands had already reached out from behind and gently hugged her. The man behind her pressed his body against hers. His gentle chest pressed against her thin back. "Do you like it?" He had just woken up and his voice was hoarse from sleepiness. It was so sexy that it numbed her. Wei Bai was silent for a long time. Suddenly, she threw the key in her hand into the flower field. Then she pushed Zero away and walked through the door again. Chapter 22-25. Zero had been looking at her gently from start to end. Wherever she went, he would follow her in silence. It was as if she was really his god and he was willing to follow her. After Bai Weiwei walked through the door, she suddenly kicked away the soft cushions in irritation. Zero obediently picked up the cushions and placed them by her feet. Weiwei Bai was even more annoyed by this. She kicked Zero's body fiercely. His body was too hard and it hurt her foot. He didn't move at all. Instead, Zero gently held her ankle. His voice was low and there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Does it hurt?" Weiwei Bai trembled and immediately took a few steps back. Her face was pale as she said fiercely, "Damn pervert, stay away from me." Zero's cold eyes blinked innocently. Then he automatically moved his body away from her. Weiwei Bai looked at him and felt as if all her strength had been injected into cotton. It was very uncomfortable. She finally exploded. She rushed over and grabbed Zero's clothes. All the anger that she had suppressed for so many days exploded. "How long are you going to lock me up? If being your god means being locked up by you, I don't want it." Zero's eyes darkened, but he revealed a gentle smile. "It's chaotic outside. Weiwei, I have to protect you." Weiwei Bai said word by word, "You're the one who's hurting me, controlling me and imprisoning me. I don't need the protection of a pervert like you." Zero's eyes darkened. Darkness began to grow in his eyes. His smile slowly turned evil and crazy. "But I need it." His fingertips gently tapped the air. Those threads suddenly moved. Weiwei Bai couldn't control her actions. Her expression was full of disgust, but she gently reached out and hugged Zero. Zero took advantage of the situation and carried her. She obediently leaned against his chest and wrapped her arms around his neck. Zero smiled brightly as he placed her on the bed. "It's time. It's time to sleep." Weiwei Bai couldn't control her body and could only lie there obediently. "You're crazy." She could only say whatever she wanted. Zero held her face. His eyes were lazy, affectionate, greedy, and devoted. His lips touched her skin and he said softly, "Don't hate me, Weiwei. You can spoil me, whip me, and punish me, but don't push me away. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were extremely sharp. She sneered, "Can I push you away? You keep saying that I am your god, but is there a god that is as useless as me? Even if I don't sleep, I have to be controlled?" Zero looked up. Under her long and thin eyelashes, her eyes were as beautiful as a river of light. It was affectionate, but there was no warmth in it at all. He leaned against the bed in an absolutely submissive and humble manner and held her fingers with both hands. It was like a gesture of pious prayer. "I just can't lose you. This is my way of protecting you. If there really was a god in this world, how could a greedy mortal let go of his god when he had a way to imprison it?" He had only done something that anyone would have done, so he never felt guilty or blamed himself. All his softness and obedience were just means to curry favor. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was crazy to seriously debate with him. She closed her eyes and pursed her lips angrily. She didn't intend to speak. But in less than a few minutes, she suddenly heard Zero murmuring softly. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes and looked at him strangely. "What are you doing?" Button. Chapter 22-26. He was actually kneeling by the bed, holding her hand and placing it on his chest. He lowered his head and prayed like a sacrificial lamb. This scene was indescribably beautiful, but it was also strange and scary. Zero's closed eyes trembled and then slowly opened. He said seriously, "I'm praying to you. Isn't it normal for a believer to pray to their God for their wishes to be fulfilled?" Wei Wei Bai, she was someone who had seen a lot. This was the first time she had seen such a scene. Don't be fooled by this lunatic. She thought that it was strange enough that the four personalities could change. The weirdest thing was that after the personality fusion, it actually created a lunatic whose brain rhythm was even weirder than hers. She didn't even know where to start. Wei Wei Bai was helpless. What wish do you want to fulfill? After saying that, get lost. You can't even sleep well. She would feel normal if he dissected her and ate her one day. Zero stared at her, real greed and desire appearing in his golden eyes. "My wish is to obtain everything of yours." Wei Wei Bai retracted her hand. "Think about it slowly. In this world, no one can obtain everything of another person. Do you think you can integrate me into your bones?" The passion in Zero's eyes dimmed a little. It was as if he knew that she was right. Wei Wei Bai impatiently reached out and pinched his chin, looking at him coldly. "There is only one way to make us fuse together, and that is to burn us to ashes together. At that time, whoever can tell whose ashes are whose will definitely be mixed together." Wei Wei Bai sneered, "Unfortunately, I can never be with you." Zero looked at her silently, then he revealed a gentle smile. Wei Wei Bai ignored him, but he gently covered her with the blanket. It was getting closer and closer to a month, and Wei Wei Bai was getting more and more anxious. Zero was still obedient and didn't fight back. Even the system couldn't stand it. "Fuck, the male lead is suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. I think you're the prisoner." Wei Wei Bai said, "Am I not pretending to be crazy so that I can find a chance to stab myself in the stomach?" Those air threads were everywhere. It was not easy to find a chance. The remaining energy of the dagger couldn't deal with Zero, but it was easy to deal with an empty balloon and an embryo that hadn't germinated. She just couldn't find a chance. The system said, "Why do I feel like you just want to beat the male lead to vent your anger?" By Wei Wei, yes The system, scumbag and scumbag, a match made in heaven. The system expressed that it would let them do whatever they wanted. It held the manual and passed it by. After half a month, one day, Zero suddenly put her in a complicated and gorgeous dress. He draped a bright red cloak over her shoulders. It was as if he was looking at the most beautiful angel. His eyes were filled with pure joy and happiness. "Wei Wei, I'll take you out." Wei Wei Bai didn't refuse, she couldn't. When he brought her to an unfamiliar place, she saw an incomparably huge ancient castle appear. The tall and magnificent door slowly opened, and everyone knelt down. Zero held her hand and walked to the balcony. There was a golden chair there. He asked her to sit down, then raised his beautiful finger and pointed down. Wei Wei Bai was mentally prepared, but she was still stunned when she saw it. Under the balcony, there were tens of thousands of people kneeling, whether they were sincere or not. At this moment she was sitting there like the ruler of the world. Zero slowly knelt down beside her. His eyes were filled with fanatical joy, just like those worshippers below. "Look, Wei Wei, I've brought the world to you." Wei Wei Bai's expression was sluggish for a few seconds, then she slowly lowered her eyes to look at him. She seemed to have thought of something, then reached out her finger and gently touched his face. This rare closeness stunned Zero for half a second. Weiwei Bai revealed a calm and hypocritical smile. Well done, Zero. Maybe he was too shocked by her. Even Zero was happy with such a little bit of encouragement. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 97. Weiwei Bai, did he really get Stockholm Syndrome from being tortured? The gentle smile on Zero's delicate face dispelled the gloomy evil aura around it. Compared to the worship of everyone in this apocalypse, her eyes were filled with affirmation, even if it was the most superficial perfunctory. It was more important than the weight of this world. Weiwei Bai stroked his hair. It was rare for her to be so close to him. She even revealed an incomparably gentle smile, just like at that time, when she was facing the weakest personality. It was beautiful and sincere. A nostalgic expression appeared on Zero's face. But Weiwei Bai's voice was light and soft, as if she was bewitching him. Zero, do you love me? Zero calmly said, I love you. Because he was so sure, there was no need for any passionate confession. There was also a sense of shock. Weiwei Bai gently stroked his hair with her fingertips, as if she was treating a favorite pet. Her voice became sweet. Then give me all your abilities, okay? Chapter 22-27. Zero seemed to be greedy for her initiative to touch him, the warmth of her fingertips. It was as if it was his salvation. He did not even care about the greed in her eyes and how unreasonable such a request was. He slowly raised his eyes. His cold golden eyes revealed a trace of a satisfied smile. You want my ability? Weiwei Bai frowned and sneered. I want it even in my dreams. But I know you won't give it to me, so get lost. She had been so irritable recently, pure and unpretentious. Emotional fluctuations, changeable June weather. Just as she was about to retract her finger, the moment her fingertips left his cheek, he suddenly grabbed her hand. He was still half squatting, his black robe fell to the ground and flowed on the ground. The golden sunlight fell on his face. She could clearly see that under his cold expression, there was a hint of reluctance. Weiwei Bai did not care whether he was willing or not. She tried to retract her finger. But now her ability was too far away from Zero's. If he did not want to let go, she could not retract her finger. Zero was still in the same position, his lips curved slightly. If possible, I would like to fulfill any of your requests. But this was not possible. Because she got what she wanted, she did not want him anymore. What she wanted was his ability. If the ability was always with him, then even if she was jealous and resentful, she could only stay by his side. Zero narrowed his eyes at her, his gaze deep and greedy. I have to stop any possibility of you leaving me. Weiwei Bai was speechless. Then she tried to retract her finger, but Zero was indifferent. He held on to her finger and did not let go. Her fingertips were still on his face. It was as if he could feel that her gentleness just now had never left. Weiwei Bai hardened her heart and scratched his skin with her fingernails. Then she realized that only a small mark was left. The smile in Zero's eyes deepened, because it seemed that she had taken the initiative to touch him again. Weiwei Bai said to the system, this guy is so perverted I can't afford to offend him. The system said, don't worry, you can be even more perverted than him. I have faith in you, good luck. Weiwei Bai was speechless. After watching the scene of thousands of people worshipping him, Bai Weiwei faintly glanced at Zero, neither happy nor sad. Zero calmly held her hand. He walked back to the darkness step by step from the light with his back facing everyone. The castle was so huge that it was impossible to imagine how it was built in such a short time. Zero did not lock her back in that damn place full of prison vines. Instead, he held her hand and walked slowly. The red carpet was as gorgeous as red wine. His golden eyes, in the dark, was suppressing a sense of happiness. It was as if it was a very happy thing to hold her hand and accompany her everywhere. In contrast, Bai Weiwei's expression was no different from that of a dead parent. Walking in front of a huge round window, she saw a vast expanse of yellow sand outside. Many huge bases were being built in the yellow sand. Zero's voice was gentle. When the bases are completed, I will begin to revive the vitality of this land, and set up a strict hierarchy. I will help you build the kingdom you like, and everyone in this world will be your slaves. All of your slaves. Because she wanted to be a god, he pressed the heads of all the people in the world and made them kneel before her. This gift was terrifying. If there was an uprising one day, those slaves would rush in and cut her into pieces. Download the https://m. Sashu. Com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 22-28. That was to be expected. He was the overlord of the base at the end of the world, but he was beaten so miserably by Zero. The relationship between humans that could be considered equal became the relationship between a slave master and a slave. Who would be willing to do that? Wei Wei Bai suddenly realized the purpose of the main system to make Zero lose all his abilities. Maybe it was because Zero used his abilities to cause too much damage in this world. The main system probably wanted him to fall in love. In the end, he destroyed the balance of the entire world. Wei Wei Bai looked out of the window for a long time. Zero thought that she was yearning for freedom. His eyes darkened. Then he quietly pulled her hand and was about to walk somewhere else. It's still so dirty outside. It'll look better with flowers and plants after it's done. Wei Wei Bai didn't move. Her eyes shone with an unimaginable light. She stepped back and sat on the windowsill. Behind the huge window was a gray sky and yellow sand. She leaned against the window, one hand still in his palm. Zero stood in the dark and looked at her quietly. Wei Wei Bai suddenly revealed a seductive smile. Her eyes narrowed, and there was a seductive look in her eyes. Kneel. Zero didn't hesitate. He elegantly knelt down on one knee. His fingers even smoothed out the creases of his black robe. His voice was quiet and gentle. Do you need me to be more humble? It was as if he would fulfill her wish if she said so. The young man's youthful face had a trace of infatuation. But more than that, there was a crazed look in the depths of his eyes. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She tentatively stretched out her other hand and gently touched his face with her fingertips. She had been dispirited for so long. Now that she was more energetic, there was a gorgeous light in her eyes. He couldn't take his eyes off her. How humble can you be? You're already kneeling? She murmured, but her smile became even more beautiful. A gust of wind blew behind her, and her long hair fluttered gently. That gorgeous beauty made Zero pause for half a second. He seemed to remember the first time they hugged. She took the initiative to press him under her body. She was a little impatient, but her beauty was indescribable. He was still a rational person. Even with such strong self-control, there were still ripples in his heart that he couldn't suppress. It was itchy, it was breathtaking, and it was love. Just like now, her eyes were filled with suppressed impatience, but there was a stunning smile on her face. Her actions were frivolous and showed no respect for him. Her every move was so devilish that people were willing to die for her. Ling gently closed her eyes. Her long and thick eyelashes suppressed the infatuation in her eyes. As long as you like it, I can do anything with you. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of madness in it. Wei Wei Bai's fingertips were already at his throat. She narrowed her eyes and smiled. Anything. After saying that, a transparent thread of air appeared under her fingernails. She had been bored out of her wits recently, so she tried to control the threads of the puppets. In the end, it took her a long time. He actually broke a thread. The thread was hidden in his fingernail and it was as tough as a sharp blade. The thread appeared without a sound. Ling didn't seem to notice it either. There wasn't even a trace of fluctuation in his eyes. His exquisite face was like the most profound and beautiful oil painting, with a strong sense of beauty. His gaze was still quietly fixed on Wei Wei Bai. His beautiful neck didn't even dodge. He quietly waited for the thread in her hand to decide. Wei Wei Bai didn't care whether or not he noticed her little trick. Button. Chapter 22-29. She continued to stroke his neck, as though she was an owner who was pampering her cat. Wei Wei Bai's voice was calm. I used to think that being a god was good. It was good to have endless power. Now that I've been locked up by you, I feel that this kind of life is not a big deal. As she spoke, the silk thread in her hand slowly cut into the skin of his neck. The silk thread was unexpectedly sharp. Blood seeped out from the transparent thread. The red liquid was like a blooming red rose. It was gorgeous and strange. Zero did not even frown. He continued to look at her with such an infatuated and loving gaze. It was as though she wanted to use the silk thread in the air to break his neck. It was just a small matter to please him. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes slightly. Her smile became sinister. Even if I kill you, you won't resist, right? Zero's beautiful thin lips moved. In the end, it was like a sigh. If that's what you want. Wei Wei Bai, she really couldn't beat him in pretending to be a pervert. If perverts were ranked, Zero would definitely be the king of perverts. Her smile froze a little. Then she exerted more force in her fingers. More blood flowed out. Blood stained her fingers. He started to tremble. His eyelashes trembled as well. His eyes became a little watery. There was a hint of fragile beauty. She could feel his breathing. It became shallower and shallower until it was almost gone. Wei Wei Bai's actions were ruthless. Her tone was cold and emotionless. Do you like it? This is my gift to you. It's a monster that I created. Since he was so generous to let her hurt him, she was not going to be polite with him. He dared to imprison her. She dared to rack her brains to kill him. Wei Wei Bai's eyes revealed endless coldness and cruelty. It was shocking. Zero was still holding one of her hands. His neck was slightly raised. Blood flowed down his exquisite collarbone and chest. It was like a sacrificial gesture. It was pure and innocent. It was absolutely stunning. The silk thread in the air at Wei Wei Bai's fingertips was red. It was the shadow of blood. She exerted force. Her hatred was so obvious. Suddenly the thread snapped. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She snorted and sneered, "What a bummer." After saying that, she wiped her bloody fingers on his clothes. Zero's powerful self-healing ability played a role. The wound on his neck healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Only his body was still covered in blood. She looked on coldly, then turned her eyes away to avoid trouble. But in the next second, Zero stood up and placed his hands on both sides of the window. His slender body enveloped her. His domineering manner made Wei Wei Bai feel uncomfortable as she looked up at him. However, she saw the smile in his eyes. His thin lips parted slightly and his voice was slightly hoarse. "Wei Wei, do I get a reward for being so obedient?" He could give up everything for her. However, he was a greedy monster. Since he had already paid the price, even if he had to snatch it by force, he had to get back some benefits. To appease the greedy and crazy beast in his heart. Wei Wei Bai was completely convinced by Zero's freakishness. She said to the system, "This is the first time I feel that my freakishness has actually lost." System, you said you're a pervert and you're so proud of yourself. Crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu.com. Chapter 2230. You can search Transmigration system. Adonis, you can come to Sashu.com in Baidu to find the against such a capable, perverted, sick, blackened and crazy target like Zero. Wei Wei Bai wondered if her future was to be a haggard old woman who had children and had a family here. She was invulnerable to both soft and hard methods. She would just deny it after eating. Wei Wei Bai told the system about her worries while stuffing food into her mouth. The system looked at her eating happily and complained with such a worried tone. It was speechless for a long time before saying, "Even if you have children, you can only stay here for 2 years." A year had passed, and the favorability of the main mission was at 97. In the past she could just leave after a while. But now she was being held back by a weird side mission. He thought that the host was anxious. Looking at the host who was eating with her mouth full, it decided to just be a haggard old woman. Wei Wei Bai sighed worriedly, "That's right, 2 years and the child is only 1 year old. How pitiful." Then she ate another piece of cake. The system was speechless. Ever since it was hit by the pervert of the male lead, it felt that it could not find a more perverted host. It seemed to have given up on itself. The system looked at a new discount item in the supermarket and hesitated whether to say it or not. It felt like the host was enjoying being a haggard old woman. Wei Wei Bai ate her cake. "What's the matter? Why are you hesitating?" System, the host can't see him, how do you know he's hesitating? Wei Wei Bai, when you pout, I know whether you're going to poop or pick up soap. System, go be a haggard old woman, a scumbag mother. In the end, the system said, there's a discount item called the Random Difficulty Solver. Wei Wei Bai, why does this name sound so weird? System, it's like a random lottery. It's a lucky gift bag. After you buy it, it can solve a problem, but you'll never know what kind of problem it's going to solve. For example, some hosts directly solve the most important strategy problem after using it. But some hosts, after using it, actually solved their recent constipation problem. It was almost like a lottery. There was a huge difference between the first prize and the thank you for your participation award. Wei Wei Bai, how much HP? The system said, 15 life points. This thing was randomly placed on the shelves. It might not even appear once in 100 years. Therefore, even though the price was extremely low, not many hosts were able to buy it. Wei Wei Bai had bought it for 580 yuan. He no longer cared about 15 days, but he still cared. But now she was forced to the point where she had nowhere to go. After swallowing the last bite of the cake, she said with heartache, "Buy it. This is the last time. If you can't solve the problem, I'll be a scumbag mother." Damn it, he had to torment himself to this extent. If she still couldn't leave, what else could she do if she had a child? The system nodded and purchased the difficulty solver. This thing was hard to come by. Even if the host didn't buy it, he would keep it and take it out when he needed it in the future. After he bought it, the system immediately gave him a prize. Then he would wait for the solution to come into play. In the end, after waiting for a long time, Wei Bai said, "Have you used it?" The system was silent for a while before saying, "Yes, I did. Do you feel anything?" Wei Bai was speechless for a moment before she suddenly touched her face. "It seems like I have a very small pimple on my face. It's gone." When she said this, the two of them fell into a deeper silence. The so-called solution to the problem was to solve the pimple that had been causing her to get angry recently? Chapter 2231. When one's luck was bad, even picking up a piece of soap could cause a comminuted fracture. Maybe it was because Wei Bai's dazed expression was too obvious. Zero, who was sitting opposite her, looked up faintly, then put his elbows on the table and leaned forward. His fingers touched her face as if her actions just now made him curious. "What's wrong? Where do you feel uncomfortable?" He did not dare to tell her that she was pregnant. He was worried that she would rebound badly. Now that she hated him, she might not like his child. He could only secretly check her body, pay attention to everything about her, and let her scold him as she wished. As long as she liked it. Wei Bai was expressionless. "I'm fine." Just as she was about to continue eating, Zero's eyes flashed with a trace of disbelief. His fingers were stained with a trace of powder. Then he looked at Wei Bai. Her white skin started to become illusory. Bit by bit, life force dispersed in her body. This scattered life force, along with her body, seemed to be collapsing and disappearing. Wei Bai also noticed the condition of her body. She frowned and asked the system, "What happened?" The system, "You exploded?" Wei Bai, the system, "Looks like the difficulty solver solved you." Solve a difficulty, then the difficulty solver gave out a reward. It actually killed Wei Bai. So in the eyes of the difficulty solver, Wei Bai's existence was a difficulty? Wei Bai. "Fuck, if I'm solved, how are we going to solve Zero's side mission? Our souls will be wiped out." She was prepared to be a scumbag mother just to use the remaining time to solve the side mission. After all, there were only a few days left. There was no way to solve Zero's ability problem. Wei Bai was just about to ask the system to look for a lifesaver to save her life. If it were not for the side mission's terrifying punishment, she did not want to pay such a high price. But before she could open her mouth, a huge and warm life force surged into her collapsing body. Her eyelashes fluttered as Zero appeared beside her and hugged her tightly. His body was trembling violently, and his voice was panting heavily. "Do you not like to be here with me that much?" That panicked tone was filled with despair and grief that surged from the depths of his throat. "I've been watching you so closely, yet you still managed to find a way to commit suicide." Wei Bai, this was a misunderstanding, but she didn't want to explain. Wei Bai seemed to have thought of something and lowered her eyes calmly. When she looked up again, the corners of her eyes were red. A deep sadness appeared in her eyes. However, there was also a cruel pleasure in his sorrowful eyes. She said softly, "You want to control everything about me, but you're not a real god. Look, my death is up to me." Zero's body stiffened as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. From the moment he was born, he had used his own power to control everything in this world. Even if it was her, she had always been in his grasp. But when he saw her, his life force began to dissipate, and he realized that his so-called power to control everything was so weak. He actually had no idea how she had managed to do all this right under his nose. He had clearly locked all of her power. Wei Bai saw that his usually calm and beautiful face had a fragile fear, and she finally revealed a brilliant smile. "Look, you're not omnipotent. At least if I were to die, you wouldn't be able to save me." His life force kept flowing into her body. However, her own life force and the speed at which her body was collapsing was always a little faster. If this continued, no matter how much life force he had, no matter how much power he had, it would all be absorbed and destroyed by her. The progress bar of the side mission that hadn't moved for a long time. It began to slowly rise again. Zero hugged her tightly. Her golden hair fell on her body, and the dust that looked like stars fell on her. It was her body and life that was disappearing. Hearing her cruel and calm words, he finally slowly raised his head. His beautiful thin lips had lost all color. Even his golden pupils had turned gray and white. It was terrifying and demonic. "You think you can get rid of me like this?" Zero's voice was so gentle that it made people's hair stand on end. His hand slowly moved to her chest. The spatial crack appeared again and a huge black power poured into his body. It turned into boundless life force that poured into her body again. Weiwei coldly said, "It's no use, you can't save me." Zero smiled and there was a shocking madness in his paranoid eyes. "That's right, but even if you want to go to hell, you have to take me with you. Don't ever think of abandoning me." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 100. Chapter 2232. The dark space crack seemed to be completely torn apart by some kind of power. In the empty space, there was a terrifying power rolling everywhere. And these powers were all absorbed by Zero. Chairs, tables, furniture, lamps, everything began to shatter in the face of absolute power. He sat on the ground with Weiwei in his arms, and his golden hair began to become illusory. Because of the rapid erosion of power, his skin also became fragile. His blood vessels burst and blood gushed out from under his skin. It was extremely frightening. However, the expression on his devilishly exquisite face, which was bleeding horribly, was still so gentle and affectionate. Weiwei's fingers gripped his clothes tightly. "You can't save me. Stop it." He was absorbing all the power in this plane of space. The vitality of the earth, the dark power of space, and the energy of people. Together they were all walking towards the true end of the world. Even Weiwei was shocked by this scene. It was a typical example of a person dying, and the whole world would be buried with him. Zero's fingers kept pinching the back of her neck. This was a possessive and paranoid action. His eyes had a hint of beautiful blurriness. In the mist of power that filled the sky, his smile was like the most beautiful demon, bewitching all living things and destroying everything like the evil god. "So what? Whether I can be saved or not, I will be with you. Live together." When he died, even if he turned into ashes, he would drag her along with his ashes. Oh, this kind of way to die from being crushed by a terrifying power. In the end, they might not even have ashes left, but even if they turned into empty energy in the end, they could still be entwined together. How could she keep leaving him? How could a terrifying and extremely vague obsession suddenly appeared in his heart? His obsession with her seemed to have started a long time ago. The fear that rose from his bones seemed to be forever her back view when she left. The fear of being abandoned made him rather die with her than live on his own. It was too painful to be alone. A world without her was too hopeless. "Don't leave me." The power that rushed into his body was then diluted by him, dissolving into gentle life force. Enter her body. He destroyed himself bit by bit to keep her by his side. Fear finally appeared in Weiwei's eyes. She had never had so many emotions in her heart. His heart seemed to throb a little. This throbbing was so faint yet so real. As if she was bewitched, she couldn't help but gently touch his eyes with her fingers. His eyelashes had a dense light, the result of his life force dissipating. Zero seemed to be shocked. His eyelashes trembled and a stream of blood flowed out from his eyes. Because he was surprised and flattered, the muscles in his eyes twitched. As a result, the already weak spot tore open, causing blood to flow out. Her life force had always been a little faster than his. Weiwei's vision began to turn black, and the world became dizzy again. She seemed to be muttering something softly, "Don't like me, it's not worth it." This sentence was more like an instinct. After she finished speaking, her mind went blank, leaving no trace behind. The side mission also announced the completion of the mission. In the shattered world, only Zero's illusory body was left. He hugged Weiwei and gradually turned into dust. Chapter 2233. He sat there quietly as the plane began to collapse. The sand of the end of the world, the barren land, and the humans who had not been sucked dry. The gray sky, the half-built base. There was nowhere to escape, only a few monsters were left. They seemed to be wiped out by some huge power. This was not the power of humans, nor was it the power of any living creature in this world. It was not even the power of the main system. It was the power of God. The system saw all this happen and could not believe it. The plane was collapsing. Under Zero's pressure, an illusory projection was revealed, and the projection was destroyed in Zero's hands. It looked at Zero with trembling eyes. It found that his transparent body was still imprisoning the pure white soul. It was Weiwei's soul. The system's fingers trembled and it wanted to reach out and snatch it. But Zero just looked up quietly. His eyes were like flowing lights, emotionless. It was not Zero's eyes. It was Yi Yuxuan? When Wei Wei Bai's body disappeared and the soul was about to return to the system, Zero woke up. Zero unexpectedly woke up and reached out to imprisoned by Wei Wei's soul in his arms. His golden hair fell to the ground, and his calm eyes were like an abyss of light. Suddenly, his eyelashes trembled, and a trace of humanity appeared. He was a little confused, but when he saw the soul in his arms, he suddenly smiled. This is the world she came from? The system finally confirmed. It looked at Zero with a strange expression. Yi Yuxuan. Oh, what was going on? Why was Yi Yuxuan here? Shouldn't he be in the real world? Waiting for a dream? How could the main system tolerate such a big bug appearing in the mission at the same time? Yi Yuxuan carefully held her soul, and his eyes became gentle. This is my Wei Wei. He remembered all of Zero's memories. In fact, he was Zero. But he had forgotten. But he still remembered her instinctively, so he was moved and happy when she approached him. Love her willingly. This was the accumulation of love from many worlds. For the first time, Yi Yuxuan realized that it wasn't the isolated feeling in her dreams, but real love. That weakest personality was after he came to this world with her. It was the purest and most instinctive emotion. It was absolute dependence and love. The system finally shouted, "How did you get here?" Yi Yuxuan had transmigrated. Without the guidance of the system, he tore through time and space to chase after her. How did he locate Wei Wei Bai's position? Red line. But just by relying on the red string, his soul had come running. How strong would one have to be to achieve this? Even if his body was very strong, his body in the real world had not awakened its true power. The system was completely in awe of Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan glanced at the system and gently hugged Wei Wei Bai. He said, "Are we going back?" The system hurriedly nodded. "Give me her soul." It was really afraid that Yi Yuxuan would suddenly take things too hard and do something crazy to Wei Wei Bai's soul. Yi Yuxuan looked at the world that had disappeared. This world is fake? The system said, "It's not fake. If you didn't appear, everything would be real." The soul of the original body had appeared, and the power was incompatible with the world. It directly crushed the world. To facilitate the next reading, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 2234. He finally knew why the main system issued the mission to destroy Zero's power. Because Zero's power did not come from this plane at all. It came from Yi Yuxuan's soul. This kind of power, no matter which plane it appeared in, it would destroy the plane. Destroying this main body's power was equivalent to saving the world. Yi Yuxuan seemed to feel that the system's words were contradictory. If he did not appear, it would be real, but if he did appear, it would be fake? His body was finally broken because of the power swallowing, and a golden soul appeared. It was not like Wei Wei Bai's weak light ball. He still had the image of a human. His body was tall and elegant, his golden hair fell to the ground, his beautiful naked body was full of the light of power. This was the image of a soul maintained by a huge power. The system reached out with trembling hands. "Can you return her soul to me?" Yi Yuxuan hugged the white light ball. He lowered his head and peered into the light ball. He found the little Wei Wei Bai curled up like a baby in the womb, sleeping peacefully. His eyes were full of gentle smiles. This was his Wei Wei. This was the first time he saw her in her soul state. She was so cute that he could not stand it. The system looked at the infatuated Yi Yuxuan, like a pitiful beggar, and continued, "When we go back, give me her soul." Yi Yuxuan completely treated the system as air. He looked up, the gentleness in his eyes turned into a murderous coldness. "You're the one hugging her every time?" System. Its neck was cold, it had a premonition that it was going to turn around. What was going on? Yi Yuxuan stared at it calmly for a while, then retracted his gaze and calmly walked towards the system. He reached out and grabbed the collar of the system that was only a few years old was swayed forward. "You lead the way, we'll go back." System. He was once a famous great commander, but now he was being carried around like a dog being walked. Did it have no shame, no dignity? Yi Yuxuan's voice was indifferent and cold. "Do you know the way?" It was as if he was telling a dog that it would be stewed if it didn't recognize the way. The system silently shed 2 lines of sorrowful tears. "Yes, of course. Take care, I'll lead the way for you." Then he packed up his handiwork and the discounted snacks and resigned himself to leading the way. This time it was surprisingly smooth leading the way. He had Yi Yuxuan's real soul by his side. The source of power that had been guarding the door of reality did not appear again. When they arrived at the door of reality, Yi Yuxuan carefully placed Wei Wei Bai's soul into the system's arms. "Protect them well." He lowered his voice and spoke earnestly. The system hugged Wei Wei Bai's soul tightly and nodded. You go out first, I'll follow? Although the journey was smooth, he was still worried. Because this was the first time that Wei Wei Bai's soul was not in his arms. He had been worried that Yi Yuxuan would suddenly go crazy and swallow Wei Wei Bai's soul. Not to mention that it was impossible, Yi Yuxuan had been tortured in so many worlds. It was not impossible for him to suddenly go crazy. Yi Yuxuan looked at the system so eagerly hugging the soul. His gaze darkened as he stared at the system's neck. System, then he silently hugged Wei Wei Bai's soul forward as if he was holding it. He did not come into too much contact with her soul. Yi Yuxuan's gaze softened a little. System, he's only a few years old now and he's jealous. Others are vinegar barrels, this is a sea of vinegar. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2235. Yi Yuxuan then passed through the door of reality and disappeared. The system also jumped into the door of reality. It put Wei Wei Bai's soul into the body. Yi Yuxuan, who was lying next to the body, moved his eyelashes and opened his eyes before Wei Wei Bai did. In the middle of his black eyes, there was a trace of pale gold. It was the color of the remnants of power. He seemed to be confused for a moment. Then his eyes began to wake up, and he turned his head to see the system floating in the air. He also saw the corner of the huge golden wheel above the system's head. Countless feathers of light floated down. They fell on them. Yi Yuxuan was used to this scene. He slowly got up and saw that Wei Wei Bai was still asleep. After the soul returned, she would be tired, so she would sleep for a while before opening her eyes. Yi Yuxuan looked up and said coldly to the system, "Don't tell her, I'll follow behind her." Although he succeeded in following her this time, he still couldn't remember her. Only when he was about to leave, when the soul left the shackles of the body, he suddenly remembered who he was. And he, who didn't know Wei Wei Bai, there was always a sense of malice towards Wei Wei Bai instinctively. So he couldn't let Wei Wei Bai know that the person she captured was him. In this way, she could coldly face the man in the plane who had malice towards her in the beginning. So that, she wouldn't be hurt. Yi Yuxuan would rather the him in the plane be destroyed by her. He also didn't want the him in the plane to hurt her. The system immediately nodded. Yi Yuxuan got up and walked out. Then he saw Bai Changyan sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper, talking about the recent business situation. Enchanting was cooking with the nanny. He had only been asleep for 8 hours. It was rare for him to sleep deeply. Even Qin Xiu thought that he was too tired recently and didn't notice anything strange. Yi Yuxuan walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator and automatically took out milk. As if by instinct he wanted to search for those wild fruits in the plain, but when he looked at the food in the fridge he came to a realization and closed the fridge with a sigh. Qin Xiu was peeling a carrot. He said, "You're awake. You've been too tired recently. It's rare to see you sleep for so long." In the past, Yi Yuxuan's resting time was as strict as a robot's. 4 to 6 hours a day, often 4 hours a day. Even with such a short amount of sleep, his body was still so healthy that it made others jealous. Ever since he started dating Wei Wei Bai, his sleeping time had become even more fragmented. From time to time he would wake up after 1 or 2 hours, and then occasionally take a nap. Even if he slept like this, his body would still be healthy without any problems. Qin Xiu sometimes felt that he was unrecognizable because of jealousy. What kind of monstrous physique was this? Was he even human? Yi Yuxuan didn't say anything. She just held the milk and leaned against the fridge. His beautiful eyelashes drooped, and his black eyes were incomparably calm. Then he slowly raised the cup to his lips and drank the milk that was going to be given to Wei Wei Bai. He tried not to bring out the habits of the plane. She would be suspicious. Yi Yuxuan drank and slowed down his breathing, getting rid of some of the little habits that would make people suspicious in the plane. Wait until later. Wait until he was free to follow her soul and enter any strange world she wanted to go to. Then he could wake up in those worlds with memories. At that time he would never hurt her. He would accompany her to do tasks, love her and spoil her. When he could absolutely master this ability he could tell her. The person she had always met was him. It was him for all eternity. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Collections below to record the reading record of this time, Chapter 2235 Reality 3. Chapter 2236. When Wei Wei Bai got up, she felt that she did not have a headache or chest ache. She said to the system, "Tongzi, did your abilities increase?" I feel so refreshed when I wake up this time, I don't have a headache anymore. The system said. Ah, maybe it's because your soul is stronger. Yi Yuxuan hugged her. How could he not feel refreshed? Her soul was wrapped in such a strong power, if she did not bump into anything, not even the wind of time and space could blow her away. When he thought about it, he felt that he was useless. Wei Wei Bai stretched and got off the bed. Let's find something to eat. Is there anyone at home? The system said. Your father, your doctor, your man. Wei Wei Bai almost kicked the door. Your man? The system said. Oh, Yi Yuxuan. He had done everything except for that one piece of paper. Even the red string was tied. If he was not her man, then what was he? The system felt a little hopeless about this scenario. Because in the end he had to break up this wild and heartless pair of mandarin ducks. If he failed, he did not know if Wei Wei Bai would be hurt. He would be destroyed by the two of them the first time. When he thought of this, he quickly took out a small biscuit to calm himself down. Wei Wei Bai said, It's the weekend today. Having 3 men at home had become a habit. Even if Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan did not live here, they would go to sleep or settle some things. When they were free, they would go to Yi Yuxuan's place. As for Yi Yuxuan, he kept his promise. Wherever she was, he would be there. After so long, every time she woke up, he would definitely be by her side. The system said, Yes, it's a weekend gathering. Dinner is just ready. Wei Wei Bai pushed open the door and walked out, but coincidentally bumped into the arms of the man who was walking towards her. It was a faint masculine scent. It was indescribable, but it was unusually clear and light. It was not a perfume, it was more like he brought it with him, a scent that came from within his body. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She could smell the scent more clearly. She had always known that there was a faint fragrance lingering around Yi Yuxuan, but it was never as clear as this. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for less than half a second. She wanted to move away, but a hand gently pressed on the back of her neck. It was a gentle force, but there was a strong sense of stubbornness. Of course, the man seemed to feel that this action was inappropriate. His fingers trembled and he immediately let go. Wei Wei Bai raised her head and saw Yi Yuxuan's delicate. His cold red lips also pursed, and then a gentle smile appeared on his face. You're awake? Bai Wei Wei nodded and quietly withdrew from his embrace. Yi Yuxuan was very calm and let her leave. Because of his natural appearance, Wei Wei Bai did not think much about the strange feeling that flashed by just now. Bai Changyan saw that Wei Wei Bai had woken up and nodded calmly. You're awake? Just in time for dinner. Qin Qiu was setting the table. Just in time, it's time to eat. After dinner, I'll give you a checkup. Everyone had a normal expression. Waking up after 3 days had become a routine. So in everyone's eyes, what was clearly a very strange thing had become as normal as daily life. Yi Yuxuan also walked over, pulled out a chair, and gestured for Wei Wei Bai to sit. Even Wei Wei Bai felt that this scene was normal. After seeing it so many times, it was normal no matter how abnormal it was. So she sat down with a calm, cute face and then began to eat. Chapter 2237. During the meal, Yi Yuxuan still calmly served her food and handed her a napkin. From time to time he would feed her something. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu, 2 lonely old dogs, faced the table full of the sour smell of love. They would also calmly serve each other food occasionally, as a friendly help between single dogs. Yi Yuxuan peeled a prawn for Wei Wei Bai, and when he handed it to her, she didn't know if it was intentional or not. His finger gently rubbed against her lips, that rich sauce aroma and the warmth of the man's fingertips. It was like a chemical reaction. It made Wei Wei Bai's scalp tingle a little. Her eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't show any expression on her face. Yi Yuxuan calmly retracted his finger. He didn't seem to be deliberately flirting with her. Wei Wei Bai buried her head in eating. She didn't dare to raise her head. After the meal, it was time for family fun. Wei Wei Bai ran to take a shower. When she closed the door, she chatted with the system before she took off her clothes. How much is my HP now? The system, 7,500. The last time she returned to reality, it was 7,500. Now it was still 7,500, thinking of the horrible HP deducted in the last plane. That dagger was 580, and there were all kinds of strange deduction items. Her mouth twitched. She felt that the transmigration strategy was so bad that she lost her underwear. If it wasn't for Yi Yuxuan's HP, she wouldn't have done it even if she died. In the time it took to eat this meal, the points deducted in the last plane were all back. Long live Yi Yuxuan. Wei Wei Bai held back her heartache and said, Can the 580 daggers still be used? The system, Can't be used. In the end, the power of the space crack poured into the male lead's body and destroyed the plane. It also destroyed the dagger. Wei Wei Bai was a little worried. With that little bit of power left, it's worth at least a dozen or 20 HP. If I knew, I wouldn't have wasted it. In the end, it's not a loss to stab myself. The system. It felt that it made sense, but also felt that something was wrong. The two extremely stingy host systems had completely distorted their views. He was silent for a while with heartache. After mourning for the 580, Wei Wei Bai sighed again. The system still had some plastic friendship. What's wrong now? Wei Wei Bai sat on the covered toilet and said with a grimace, I'm dying. The system asked, what's wrong with you? After returning, her heart felt much better. Even if she was bungee jumping now, she would probably be fine. Other than her short lifespan, her physical condition was already better than most ordinary people. Wei Wei Bai said, in the past, I was in poor health and had to think twice before doing anything. Now that I'm in good health, I can do anything I want. The system was confused. Isn't that good? Wei Wei Bai sighed. How did you feel when Yi Yuxuan fed me just now? The system said, that braised prawn, it looked delicious. Wei Wei Bai facepalmed. It was delicious, but it wasn't the prawn that was delicious. When Yi Yuxuan fed me and his beautiful fingers touched my lips, I almost jumped up like I was electrocuted. When one's body recovered, one would have more energy. It was the same for both men and women. When one was full of energy, it felt like spring had come. There were prickly animals everywhere. The system said, so you're full, so you want to? Wei Wei Bai held her face with both hands and said in a daze, I've suppressed myself for too long. I'm not dead after facing Yi Yuxuan every day. The system said, you're so thick-skinned and you're as tough as a cockroach. What are you suppressing? Just go up and block, 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 block. The Transmigration system said, my Prince Charming, come here. Crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. The book, please recommend it to your friends, QQ, blog, WeChat, etc. Chapter 2238. But she said softly, I want. Yi Yuxuan's pupils constricted. She said, you. The girl's beautiful eyes were filled with tears. If she said it too generously, it would lose the original sense of attachment. It was more of a straightforward request. Yi Yuxuan suppressed the instinctive evil in his heart and sighed helplessly. Do you know what you're saying? How could he not see the seriousness and indifference in her expression? Serious, indifferent. It was the complete opposite, but she could show it so fearlessly. If he was more ruthless to her, she wouldn't know how dangerous it would be. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. She hadn't said anything yet. Why did he look like he understood everything? One night was indeed a little awkward and difficult to say. But Wei Wei Bai, who was pleasantly thick-skinned, still straightened her neck. I think we can go further. Yi Yuxuan's fingers trembled, but looking at her expression, she didn't mean that at all. He pursed his lips and his eyes darkened. Which step do you want to go further? It definitely wasn't the step he was thinking of. If it was, she wouldn't have such an expression. Yi Yuxuan sometimes hated his observation skills. Any slight change in her seemed like he was reading her innermost thoughts. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up and she reached out her hand to signal him to come closer. Yi Yuxuan hesitated for half a second before gently putting his ear to her lips. The girl's breath was like a sweet wind, making the tip of his ear a little soft. Her words made him feel even more helpless. After saying her request, Wei Wei Bai felt that if Yi Yuxuan was a man, he would definitely agree. But in the next second, Yi Yuxuan's fingers pressed against the back of her head. His calm voice contained traces of helplessness. In your eyes, am I that casual? Bai Wei Wei blinked her eyes. What do you mean by whatever? Yi Yuxuan was reluctant to say anything harsh, but she could still hear the seriousness in her tone. I'm a responsible person. Wei Wei Bai was in a daze, seemingly unable to react. These words were too fucking correct. She was a person whose moral bottom line had fallen into an ocean trench. She felt guilty when she heard that. Yi Yuxuan's eyes were deep and burning, but his tone was as calm as possible. So, once we have a relationship, I can't not know them after one night. What I want is to confirm that kind of relationship after marriage. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. Damn, Yi Yuxuan was so conservative. Yi Yuxuan's fingers slowly stroked her hair. When his fingers brushed past the ends of her hair, he almost couldn't help but twirl the ends of her hair around his fingertips and play with them. This was a small problem brought about by the plane. It was a paranoid, crazy, and possessive action. He quickly stopped his fingers and released her hair with difficulty. He was more and more influenced by the plane. Yi Yuxuan lowered his eyes and said softly, "If you can't bear it, let's go get a marriage certificate tomorrow, okay?" Wei Bai trembled and quickly said, "No, no, 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 I'm just kidding." Yi Yuxuan's eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. Although he was rejected, he knew how she was like. If she didn't really like him, she wouldn't make such a request. Yi Yuxuan pretended not to know her dilemma. He calmly carried her, walked to the room and put her back on the bed. His handsome face was very calm. He covered her with the quilt and looked at her embarrassed red face. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com/. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.